Bound or Burn. A Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook. Written by Rain Hart. Chapter 1. Knife at the Throat. The fog came first. It slithered over the forest floor in milky coils, softening the edges of Ashfen's ancient pines. Then came the scent, resin, ash, the iron tang of blood soaked into timber. Rowan Vale pressed her fingers to the salt-mark scar on her wrist, hidden beneath her threadbare glove. It prickled like a warning or a reminder she did not belong here. Not among wolves. The longhouse crouched ahead, wooden bones dark with age, a steady glow bleeding from its narrow windows. Smoke whispered from its chimney, coiling into the moonless night. Her breath misted. Somewhere behind her, the Coven's echo still rang in her ears. Deliver his head. Break the bond. Come home cleansed. But there would be no home. Not for a witch sent to kill a monster, and especially not for one who had begun to doubt who the real monsters were. She stepped forward. The guise was simple, a traveling herb woman, hired by a merchant caravan to soothe tired limbs and bandage border bruises. She'd joined their slow crawl up the Fog Harbor Causeway, selling nettle tea and hawthorn balm. No one had looked too closely. No one had asked why her fingers smelled faintly of wolfbane, or why the edge of her smile didn't reach her eyes. Not even the guards at the Ashfen gates. Her satchel bumped against her hip with each step, carefully packed with dried hellebore, blister root, a few forged contracts, and the cold iron blade tucked inside a false-bottomed pouch, coated with lupus deterrens. The wolves called it wolf shame. It made their skin blister, their breath catch, their instincts recoil. She hadn't used it in years. Tonight she might. Rowan reached the longhouse door and knocked once. Then twice, sharply. The silence that followed was so heavy it made her stomach twist. Then, hinges creaked. A figure filled the frame, broad-shouldered, backlit by amber firelight. Eyes the color of storm-lit stone raked over her in one practice sweep. Name, he said. Voice like gravel ground fine. Rose Vale, she lied smoothly. Apothecary. Your steward purchased a poultice order. A pause. The eyes narrowed, but he stepped aside. Enter. Briefly. She stepped into warmth. The scent hit her first, pine sap, smoke, wet fur, leather. Her gaze flicked around the room. Furs layered over worn stone floors, weapons on the walls, a long table still holding the bones of a late supper. Shadows flickered behind pillars. She marked 2 exits. 1 stairwell. 3 men and a woman sat by the hearth, their low conversation silencing at her arrival. Rowan offered a brief bow, fingers tightening subtly around her satchel. The man who'd opened the door motioned toward the far end of the room. Alpha's office. Go. She went. The door stood ajar. A map-strewn desk took up most of the room, oil lantern light licking the paper edges. A figure stood beside it, half-turned, sleeves rolled, moonbone ring glinting on one scarred knuckle. When he looked up, the air changed. Calder Voss did not look like a myth. He looked like a man who'd built himself out of endurance and quiet fury. He didn't rise. Just tilted his head slightly as if weighing wind patterns. You're late. Rowan set the satchel down. I came as fast as your courier allowed. A slow blink. Your hands are shaking. She froze. Then steadied them. Cold. He moved with quiet precision, closing the office door with a click that felt final. Then, he stepped closer, and Rowan's heart began to pound. She pulled the blade before she could second-guess it. The cold iron hissed in the air. 1 heartbeat, 2. She moved like a whisper, like the forest had taught her, silent and sure, knife angled for his throat. But she never made contact. Because the moment she breached the space between them, the pain vanished. Her own pain. It had lived in her for so long, sawmark ache, old bruises of memory, a constant undertone of fire beneath skin. It vanished like breath in frost. And Calder, he sucked in a sharp breath, staggering back a step. His hand flew to his chest, as if a noose had just been cut. What did you do? He said, not a question but a snarl. Rowan blinked. Her knife hand trembled, and not from effort. I didn't, her voice faltered. The space between them widened by inches. And then the pain returned. A burst of white-hot agony beneath her ribs, as though salt had been poured into open wounds. Her knees buckled. Calder caught her before she hit the floor. Flesh met flesh. Fire met water. The pain ebbed. Again. His jaw was clenched so tightly she could hear it creak. What are you? She tried to shove him away, but her limbs wouldn't cooperate. Let go. You tried to kill me. And I'd do it again, she spat. If I could move. Calder lowered her carefully into the armchair by the hearth. His gaze, when it met hers, was no longer confused. It was furious. And curious. And, beneath all that, afraid. Bran, he called. Footsteps approached fast. The stone-faced man from earlier stepped in, hand already on his blade. He paused when he saw Rowan. Calder didn't look away from her. 3 days, he said. Bran stiffened. Alpha. 3 days of breath and truth. Then she answers for the blade. Calder's voice dropped. But no bruises. No violations. Keep her alive. Rowan laughed, though it hurt. Touching. You stay within this house, which, Calder said, voice like iron. You step more than 10 paces from me, you burn. You don't scare me. You should, he said quietly. And then he turned away. But the moment his steps took him past the threshold, the fire returned, sharp, punishing, pure. Rowan gasped, doubling over as if her ribs were melting. Bran was beside her in a blink, barking something she didn't hear. She clawed at the saw mark on her wrist. What the hell had the Coven done to her? Or, worse, what had they broken? Chapter 2, 10 Steps of Fire. Morning came slow and silver through the pines. Ashfen woke like a beast stretching beneath mist, its forest ribs creaking, its breath cool and damp. From her narrow cot in the longhouse's north chamber, Rowan watched the fog filter through the open shutter, curling in like fingers. Her body ached, not from bruises, but from distance. She'd spent the night tracing that boundary like a wire-thin tripline. Calder Voss was gone from her presence. And so, the pain had come back, curling inside her chest like something feral and unmaking. She hadn't screamed. She'd clenched her teeth until her jaw clicked and pressed a cool poultice of willow bark and blood leaf to the base of her spine, where the agony pooled hottest. She'd survived worse. She was worse. But morning light offered no mercy. A knock came, not the kind meant to ask permission, but the kind that said move. She sat up slowly. The movement alone sparked another bolt of heat across her ribs. When the door opened, it wasn't Bran with his soldier's stiffness. It was a woman, dark-haired, eyes sharp enough to cut, bow slung across her back and a length of rawhide tied around one wrist like a second mouth that never stopped whispering. You're the witch, the woman said. You're observant. A snort. I'm Sable Rook. I hunt for the Alpha. And today I babysit. How flattering. Sable didn't smile. You come with me. Calder wants proof. Of what you are. And what he's tethered to. I'm not tethered to anyone. Try stepping 10 paces away and say that again without writhing. Rowan rose with care, every joint a protest. She moved stiffly, collecting her satchel, stuffing the half-used salves inside. Her fingers hesitated on the small tin of crushed myrrh and bellflower, pain-dulling herbs she'd kept for herself, just in case. She took it. Outside, the longhouse yard had begun its quiet morning churn. Wolves in human form, young and old, sharpened blades, carried water, stirred pots of something that smelled like bone broth and dirt. Rowan kept her eyes straight ahead. Calder stood beyond the training rings. He was bare-armed again, the sleeves of his gray shirt rolled up to the elbow. Morning light licked the lines of his shoulders and collarbones. The tension knotted across the back of his neck. He looked like a man carved by restraint, and maybe a little haunted by it. His gaze found her as if it had been waiting. Walk, he ordered. Then he turned, striding across the yard. Rowan didn't need direction. She followed. And counted. 1 step. 2. The pain didn't hit like a hammer this time. It crept in, slow as poison. By the 7th step, Her breath was catching. By the 10th, it felt like someone was stitching fire into her lungs with a silver needle. She stumbled. Sable reached for her on instinct, but Rowan shrugged the hand off. Calder had stopped, his back still to them. He exhaled sharply, and when he turned, his face was unreadable. Confirmed, he said quietly, as if to himself. Then louder, Sable, stay close. She walks with us now. She stays within 10 steps. To what end? Rowan demanded, breathing hard. You'll keep me leashed like a dog? I'm the one burning too, which, he said, voice low. You think I enjoy this? His eyes dropped briefly to her hands. She was trembling. She hated that he could see it. Come, he said again. There's more to test. They walked the perimeter of the longhouse, Calder in the lead, Rowan close behind, Sable a shadow at her back. The pain rose and fell in waves, never fully gone, but softened the closer she was to him. When they paused beneath the Muwatch Tower, Calder finally turned. You made a salve, he said. For the pain. Rowan met his eyes, proud and sharp. I'm a green witch. Pain is our first language. His gaze dropped again, this time to her belt, where a thin flask of greenish balm hung. Use it. I don't need. Use it, he repeated, gentler this time. Rowan narrowed her eyes, but opened the tin. Dipped her fingers. She smeared it across the base of her neck and the inside of her wrists. The smell was bitter, earthen, like roots soaked in rain. As it took effect, her breathing eased. Calder studied her for a long beat. It helps. Not enough, she admitted. He nodded. Then something flickered in his expression, something like a grimace or a warning. His hand went to his chest. And Rowan felt it, his pain now a sharp echo through the tether. It came not as fire but pressure, like a hand pushing against his sternum from the inside. His breathing turned ragged. Moondet, Sable said quietly. He's pushing past it too long. Calder waved her off. Not your concern. I can help, Rowan said before she could stop herself. Both heads turned to her. I know what it is, she added. The way it eats through the ribs like rust. The tremor behind the eyes. His mouth tightened. That a confession or a threat? Neither. He looked at her for a moment too long, then stepped closer. Their proximity dulled his pain almost instantly. Rowan felt it too, in reverse, the relief of his agony abating. The tether between them wasn't just a curse. It was a channel. A circuit. Are we going to pretend this isn't happening? She asked softly. I don't have time to pretend, he said. I need facts. Function. And after 3 days? His answer was silence. A breath passed. Then another. A shout rang from the far end of the yard. Bran, sprinting, his face unreadable and tight. Alpha, he called. South Watch Post. 2 pups missing. Tracks cut by humans. Calder's entire posture changed. How long? He barked. An hour. Maybe less. Patrols searching. Sable was already moving toward the stables. Calder turned to Bran, then stopped. Looked at Rowan. You know poisons. I know traps, she corrected. Can you track? She hesitated. I can try. Then you're coming. Bran bristled. She's not. She's the only one who might recognize a salt mark sigil before we lose another cub, Calder snapped. And she can't go more than 10 steps without collapsing. Rowan lifted her chin. So I'm bait now. Your insurance. And if I run? He stepped close, too close. His scent was wild pine and steel. You won't get far. You'll be on fire before you clear the pines. She almost smiled. Then you'd better keep up. Chapter 3, Lanterns in the Mire. The wetlands drank the moonlight like a thirsty beast. Water pooled beneath moss-laced roots, black as ink and still as held breath. Lanterns swung from the curved iron poles Calder's pack had driven into the peat years ago, dim, amber glows that barely cut the fog. Somewhere in the darkness, a frog croaked once, then fell silent, as if even it knew what hunted through the mire tonight. Rowan moved through it all like a blade unsheathed. Silent, sharp, glinting in the half-light. She walked just ahead of Calder and Bran, the Alpha's presence anchoring her pain into something almost manageable. She could feel the edge of it, just beneath her skin, waiting, ready to surge if she drifted too far. Behind them, the pack scouts fanned out in silence, boots sinking into moss and muck, weapons drawn. The air was thick with pine pitch, decay, and the coppery hint of something that didn't belong. Blood. And something worse. Salt. Rowan paused near a shallow bend in the path, crouching low. Her gloved hand swept over the soft ground, fingers brushing through lichen and half-rotted needles. She whispered under her breath, an invocation of touch and memory. The green responded, faint but true, a pulse in the moss, a breath in the stillness. There, she murmured. It's been disturbed. Bran moved to her side, his shadow enormous in the mist. Wolves. She shook her head. Too deliberate. Someone cleared away the upper layer, then reset it. Poorly. She pressed 2 fingers deeper into the mud, then hissed. Cold iron kissed her skin. Trap, she said. Consecrated salt laced with iron filings, buried shallow. Calder was already beside her, crouching low. How recent? Hours. Maybe less. Whoever said it knew what they were hunting. His jaw clenched. Not many humans know this trick. No, she said quietly. But witches do. Calder met her eyes. For a moment, the world narrowed to just that look, full of unspoken warning, of shared dread. Bran cleared his throat. Alpha. From the trees came a high, warbled cry, half howl, half scream. A wolf pup. The 3 of them ran. They found the cub tangled in a hunter's snare, one paw twisted at a wrong angle, blood matting his fur. He thrashed as they approached, yelping in panic, until Calder dropped to his knees and murmured low, guttural words in the old tongue, calming sounds meant for the pack's youngest. The pup stilled, panting. Rowan moved to the creature's side, ignoring the pain flaring in her chest. Her fingers worked fast, drawing a blade from her boot to cut the bindings. The scent of silver was faint, but present. Enough to poison a full-grown wolf. A pup wouldn't last much longer. He's fading, she said. Bran hovered, stone-faced. We carry him. No, Rowan snapped. He won't make it 10 steps. She dug into her satchel with shaking hands, pulling out 2 glass vials and a bundle of dried violet root bound in twine. Her fingers shook, not from fear, but from the strain of keeping upright, keeping calm. The tether pulled taut. She was nearly at her limit. What are you doing? Calder asked. Rowan didn't answer. She bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste iron, then uncorked the vials, mixing the contents over the root, whispering a word of binding. The salve turned opalescent. Then, with slow, deliberate grace, she pressed one palm to the pup's bloodied flank and the other to her own bare skin, above her heart. A pulse tore through her. Pain poured in like floodwater. Not her own. The pup gasped and fell still, but breathing eased. Shallow, but steady. Rowan curled forward, one hand braced in the muck, body racked with a sudden feverish tremor. Her vision doubled. She could taste the pup's pain now, broken bone, poison-laced nerves, raw terror. She took it all. Calder's hand found her shoulder. Stop, he said, rough. I can't. You're bleeding. She was. From the nose. Maybe more. She didn't care. Then strong arms scooped her up. She fought weakly. No. You're done, Calder said. You did enough. Her head lolled against his chest. Heat radiated from him, steady and wild, and her tether settled into something bearable again. His scent wrapped around her like the memory of forests untouched by fire, sap, and damp bark, something older than safety. You're too far, she whispered. If I faint, the pain will. I won't let you faint, he said. And somehow she believed him. He carried her through the mire like a vow. One arm under her knees, the other across her back, palms spread between her shoulders as if it could hold her together by pressure alone. Her body, though racked with residual agony, relaxed into them in increments, against her will, and because of it. Behind them, Bran retrieved the now breathing cub and followed in silence. By the time they returned to the base of Moowatch Tower, fog curling between their boots like ghost silk, Rowan was barely conscious. Calder laid her out on a cot by the hearth inside the Alpha's watch chamber, brushing damp strands of auburn hair from her brow. The moment his touch left her skin, she stirred and whimpered. He returned it at once, barely a graze of fingertips along her jaw, but it steadied her. "Damn the salt mark," he muttered. "Damn all of it." She opened one eye. "That's the first thing you've said I agree with." He exhaled, tension loosening just enough for something softer to bleed through. "What did you do out there?" "Called it switch pain," she rasped. "Transfer, temporary. You nearly passed out." She gave a weak smile. "Better me than the pup." Calder's eyes darkened. "That wasn't just magic. That was a choice." "No," she said. "It was both." She drifted after that, pulled under by exhaustion and the burn of used-up spell work. Calder didn't move far. He sat on a low bench beside her cot, moo bone ring catching the firelight as he turned it absently on his finger. Until Bran returned with the pup, clean bandages on its leg and a deeper frown on his face. "We found tracks." Calder stood. "Human. Booted prints. Medium weight. Mud flattened deliberately. And something else." He handed over a strip of torn bark, sigils etched in faint black ink. Rowan stirred, eyes narrowing at the symbol. "That's Coven," she whispered. Calder's gaze snapped to hers. "You're sure?" "Yes." Her voice grew steadier. "That's Asila's warding mark. The one she used on our offering altars." Bran scowled. "They're moving east. Toward the causeway." Calder's jaw set. He looked back down at Rowan, something shifting behind his eyes, not just anger, but a promise forming. "Then we move with them." Chapter 4, Fog Harbor Bargain. Fog Harbor always smelled like rust and secrets. The causeway stretched like a spine of iron and salt over the tide flats, its rails glistening with condensation, its air thick with the white murk that poured in off the sea. Beyond the low moan of gulls, the horizon didn't exist. Only fog. And somewhere inside it, the line between alliance and betrayal. Rowan walked beside Calder with the tension of a coiled trap. Each step over the slick stones felt both too loud and too light, like she wasn't sure whether she was being led into a parley or an ambush. Calder hadn't said. Only that they were meeting with the fogmen, port brokers, smugglers, and sometimes informants, who held the harbor's whispers in their calloused palms. "I thought you preferred steel over speech," she muttered. Calder didn't look at her. "I prefer what works." Sable Rook followed behind, silent but alert, her eyes scanning the mist for movement. Her bow wasn't strung, but her hand rested on it anyway. Even she seemed tense in the salt-heavy air. Rowan could feel the pain creeping again the moment Calder veered more than a few steps from her side, and she could tell he felt it too, in the twitch of his jaw, the subtle stiffness of his spine. "Don't go soft on me now," Rowan said. "You'd know if I broke," he said flatly. The rail station appeared out of the mist like a ghost ship, gray steel, rusted supports, lanterns swinging in the wet wind. 3 men stood under the awning, shadowed and hunched against the damp. One stepped forward. Broad, with a brass ring in his nose and the weary weight of knowing too much on his face. "Alpha Voss," he greeted. Calder inclined his head. "Thorn." Rowan watched them exchange the kind of nod that meant debts had been exchanged before and never quite settled. Calder said little. Let the man talk. Let the man bluff. Let him try to overplay a hand built on half-truths and dock gossip. The fogman gestured to a crate. "You looking for weapons? Medicine? Or just names?" "Pups went missing," Calder said. "West route." "Your men saw anything?" Thorn clicked his tongue. "Saw a fast hauler, 'bout dawn. No flags. Heavy load. Headed east on the narrow rail. Same one your kind avoids." "Why avoid it?" "Because," Thorn said with a smirk, "it stinks of witch tricks and holy salt. And none of you like burning." Rowan stepped forward. "Witch tricks?" The man blinked at her, then glanced at Calder. "You didn't say you brought your own." "She's with me," Calder said simply. "Answer her." Thorn looked her up and down. "Didn't see no casters, but the fog changed." thickened in ways that don't come natural. Like it remembered too much blood. And there was a sound. Singing. Off-key. Rowan's stomach turned. Where? 3 miles past the rail spur. Calder nodded once. We'll check it. But as they turned to leave, the wind shifted. Rowan froze. That smell. Salt and smoke, yes, but beneath it, a tang she knew intimately. The residue of salt mark vacation. Not fresh. Faint. But unmistakable. She moved fast, ignoring Sable's barked warning, following the scent like a hound. It pulled her to the far end of the station, toward a waiting line of cargo carriages, old freight units used by smugglers to hide illegal or rare herbs. She stopped at one. And then she knew. This one. Calder was at her back in an instant, his hand already on the rusted latch. What do you smell? Salt mark. Someone cast inside. Recent. Could be weeks. Could be hours. He heaved the latch up with a groan of metal, and they forced the door aside. The carriage was dark, heavy with mildew and the rot of too long wet burlap. Crates lined the interior. But it wasn't the contents that made Rowan's breath catch. It was what lay across one of the boxes. A length of fabric. Faded green. Frayed at the edge. A binding wrap. Her binding wrap. She crossed the space in 2 steps and snatched it up. The knot was hers, half twisted at the end like she always did in a hurry. The knot only one other person had been taught to mimic. Tamsin. She swallowed hard, blinking against the sting behind her eyes. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the cloth to her face. The scent was faint, but it was there. Lavender. Burnt chamomile. A trace of ashwood ink. She turned, throat closing around the words. Calder didn't speak. Didn't push. He only watched her, his face unreadable, but something in his stance had changed. Softer. He stepped closer, slowly, as if not to spook her. It's hers, Rowan said, barely a whisper. Tamsin. She nodded, then turned away quickly, jaw tight. She was here. Maybe still is. Sable came to the door, her voice low and grim. We found drag marks by the cliffside. 2 sets. One resisting. Calder's gaze locked with Rowan's again. Then she wasn't alone. Rowan's fists clenched around the wrap. We have to go after her. You can't even stand 10 steps from me without seizing. Then don't get far. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. So we're partners now. Temporary allies, she corrected. But the word caught in her throat. Because something else was happening between the pain and proximity, between the cloth in her hands and the tether that bound them. She could feel his heart beat again. Not through the bond, but in the realness of him. Steady. Present. Not pressing or posturing. He was just there. And she found she didn't mind it. Not in the mist. Not here. Not now. We'll track her, Calder said. Tonight. After dark. Rowan looked up at him. Why wait? Because the tide's turning. The fog will thin. His eyes softened. And you need time. To what? Cry. To breathe. For once, she didn't argue. Chapter 5. The Glass House Pact. The glass house was nothing like the timbered longhouse that crowned Ashfen's rise. Where the Alpha's seat smelled of pine smoke and leather, this place was humid with moss and green things, panes beaded with condensation from the heat of a coal-fed furnace buried beneath the floor. Vines curled like serpents through the latticework, catching sunlight in trembling drops. It was the last of Ashfen's great winter conservatories, once a merchant's vanity, now Calder's to lend or guard. Rowan stood just inside the double doors, hands shoved deep into her pockets to hide the restless twitch of her fingers. She'd asked for this meeting, and she knew the risk of showing her cards. But the ache behind her breastbone hadn't lessened in days, the phantom burn whenever the tether stretched even a little. If she was going to last long enough to find Tamsin, she needed a way to function without shattering. Calder stood across the long table, shoulders casting a shadow across the ferns. His gray eyes tracked her like he was weighing the tilt of a blade. You said you had a proposal. 3 days, she said. I stay in Ashfen, work here in the glass house. I'll treat whoever you send me, pack injuries, old ailments. In exchange, you let me move freely. No cells. No guards breathing down my neck. His jaw flexed. And what keeps you from running? She lifted the satchel from her shoulder, letting the glass vials inside chime together. Because if I go, the pain goes back to both of us. And I doubt you'll be much use to your pack doubled over. That earned her a low, humorless huff. But he didn't say no. 3 days, he said slowly, and you don't set foot outside Ashfen's border. Done. She moved to the table, laying out her kit with brisk efficiency: mortar, pestle, sprigs of dried frost leaf, and ground valerian root. Now sit. His brows went up. Excuse me. You've been pretending it's not getting worse. The tether, the moon debt, whatever you're calling it. Let me work, Alpha. He hesitated, then dragged out the nearest chair, lowering himself into it with the wary grace of a man stepping into unfamiliar terrain. Up close, she could see the tension etched at the corners of his mouth, the faint strain in his hands as he braced his thighs. Rowan crushed the frost leaf, its sharp scent rising between them. She added valerian, a drop of heated pine resin, and began to stir. This isn't a cure. It's a patch. A balm to trick the bond's pain receptors into thinking they've already been soothed. You've done this before? His voice had gone quiet, almost conversational. Her shoulders stiffened. Once. A long time ago. She reached for his hand before she could think better of it, palm meeting the warm breadth of his. The jolt was immediate, like stepping from a blizzard into a firelit room. She almost gasped, but forced herself to focus, smearing the salve across his skin, over the raised lines of his veins. His gaze didn't waver. It stops when you touch me. Her pulse thudded in her ears. It's chemical. Or, maybe not. He caught her wrist lightly, not enough to bruise. And you? She should have lied. Should have told him she felt nothing. But the truth was there in the way her shoulders had eased, the dull throb in her own chest quieting under the warmth of his fingers. It's the same, she said, and hated the admission. The air between them thickened, ripe with the damp perfume of the hothouse. He let her go, but not before his thumb traced the inside of her wrist, a touch so brief she might have imagined it. She turned away, pretending to grind another measure of frost leaf, though her hands shook. They tested it again, standing apart, the ache mounting until her breath came short, then stepping closer until it broke like a fever. It was as maddening as it was addictive, the illicit relief of proximity. She caught herself watching the way his chest rose and fell, the subtle shift of his weight as he leaned in to check her work. This could be dangerous, he said at last. So could everything else about this, she shot back. When he left, it was with the small tin of balm in his pocket and a glance over his shoulder that lingered just long enough to burn. Night dropped over Ashfen like spilled ink. The glass panes turned to mirrors, reflecting her in pale fragments as she cleaned the work table. That was when she heard the scrape, a faint, deliberate tap against the frame of the open window. Rowan froze. A shadow detached itself from the trellis. The familiar oval of a face, the quick flick of braid over shoulder. Tamsin. Her eyes, fox bright even in the dark, darted toward the door before she pulled something from her sleeve and set it on the sill, a twist of paper, bound with green thread. No words. No time. Then she was gone, swallowed by the night. Rowan's fingers were already at the knot, tearing it open. Inside, a sigil scrawled in ashwood ink, one she knew by heart: meet at Blackridge. Her throat tightened. 3 days. That was the deal. She blew out the lantern, the darkness closing in like a promise. Chapter 6: Salt Cathedral Whispers. The city at night was a lattice of shadow and steam, and Blackridge's heart beat slow beneath a shroud of coal smoke and salt wind. The Salt Cathedral rose out of the square like a thing carved from moonlight and old bones, its spires skeletal against the mist, its bells holding their tongues as if the tide itself had forbidden them to speak. Rowan kept her hood low, every sense sharpened to the point of a blade. She could feel the salt mark's ghost even before she crossed the threshold, thin as cobweb in the lungs, bitter on the tongue. Not fresh. Not dead. Alive enough to twitch when she breathed it in. Calder walked close, his coat brushing hers, his presence like heat cupped between cupped palms. He didn't speak, but she could feel his attention tracking everything. Street vendors packing away their fish crates, lantern oil dripping into gutters, the curl of her fingers where they hid inside her cloak. Bran moved ahead, a darker shadow among shadows, glancing back once to signal the way was clear. They slipped through a side gate, the hinges sighing under their weight, and entered the nave from a servant's corridor. The cathedral swallowed them whole. Columns of salt white stone rose high into a darkness laced with glimmering veins of mineral, catching moonlight through narrow stained glass slits. The air was cool and dry, sharp with the tang of sanctified salt. Rowan's nostrils flared. "The main vein is here," she murmured. "Under us. Strong enough to feed a city's worth of bindings." Bran's eyes tracked movement near the altar. Not just priests. His voice was quiet steel. 2 guards. Cold iron. And salt pouches. Her stomach tightened. The presence of both was deliberate, surgical, precautions that meant they expected trouble. Wolves would be useless against them, witches slowed to a crawl. Calder's gaze found hers, gray eyes steady. "Stay near me." She almost laughed at the obviousness of it. Not much choice, is there? The bond still burned when she strayed too far, but lately, proximity carried its own quiet dangers. They crossed the nave in silence, their footsteps hushed by the salt grit floor, and slipped down a narrow stair behind the altar. The temperature dropped with each step. Damp crept into the air, carrying a sound like distant rain. No, not rain. The rhythm was too erratic, too uneven. Like sobbing. Rowan slowed, the fine hairs on her arms rising. "Do you hear that?" Calder's head tilted, wolf sharp. "Yes. It's coming from below." "That's the salt well." The walls here wept, thin trickles of brine glinting in the low lamplight, beating on the carved salt like tears on skin. Every breath tasted of the sea, but heavy, like the deep tide pressing against the bones of the world. Bran checked the corner before them, then raised 2 fingers in warning. Another pair of guards. Stationary. They waited until the men moved, then slid deeper into the corridor. The whispering sob grew louder, curling around Rowan's ribs, pressing at her thoughts. It was more than sound. It was something old and aching, pushing memories toward the surface like splinters under skin. And then the cathedral's bell struck. The sound crashed through the stone like a shattering wave. Rowan's breath caught, her knees buckled. The salt mark under her skin flared, hot and invasive, as if someone had pressed a brand to her sternum. The sobbing in the walls became a chorus, every note digging claws into her. Her hand slammed to the wall, but the salt burned her palm. She gasped, the world tilting. A hand caught her wrist. Firm. Warm. Steady. "Rowan." Calder's voice was low, cutting through the noise like a rope in a storm. His thumb pressed to the inside of her wrist, feeling her pulse as if to claim it. "Look at me. Breathe with me." She fought for air, fought for something to anchor her, and found it in the weight of his gaze. Gray eyes unwavering, holding her in place while the cathedral tried to drag her under. She drew breath to his rhythm, her chest rising and falling against the distant toll of bells. Slowly, the burn eased from searing to simmering. When she could stand again, she realized how close he was, his body shielding hers from the corridor's chill, his scent laced with pine and something faintly metallic. Not overpowering, but grounding. "I'm fine," she lied. His mouth curved, not quite believing. "You're breathing." Before she could answer, a new sound wound its way through the walls, softer than the bells, so much more dangerous. A lullaby. Her blood turned to ice. She knew every note, every pause in that song. The voice that had once sung it to her in the dark. "I know that song." Calder's grip tightened. "Who sings it?" Her throat locked around the name. The memories surged anyway. A small firelit room, hands braiding her hair, the smell of ashwood and lavender. In the dark ahead, the lullaby drifted on, as if the cathedral itself was humming to her. And the saltwell kept whispering beneath it all. Chapter 7. Bloodsong in a Cup. The alleys of Blackridge were too narrow for Truth to walk freely. They twisted like the roots of dead things beneath salt-stained stone, thick with coal smoke and steam vented from beneath the grates. Here, lantern light wasn't golden, it was bruised, bent by mist and memory. Rowan moved like she had before she ever touched Ashfen soil, alone, cloaked, and watching every shadow. Except she wasn't alone anymore. Calder walked at her side, silent but solid. He wore the plain gray of a dockworker, his shoulders hunched low, hood drawn. But he couldn't disguise what he was, not really. Wolves had a weight to them. The city sensed it, even if it didn't understand. Men crossed the street. Vendors turned their signs. No one stopped them. At the corner where rust met soot, a slip of paper peeled loose from a wall, sigilled in green wax, edges curling like a dying leaf. Rowan snatched it before the wind could carry it away. The symbol was hers. The burn mark in the bottom corner was Tamsin's. "She's here," she murmured. Calder's breath steamed beside hers. "How long?" "Not long." This was freshly pressed. She looked up at the broken lamp just beyond the sign. "We're close." The tavern smelled like old lies and older whiskey. The kind of place where loyalty lasted only as long as the silence was bought and the chairs stayed upright. Music bled from the back room, fiddle too fast, voices too loud. No one looked up as they entered. No one cared. But Rowan did. She felt it like a heartbeat beneath her feet. Saltmark residue. Someone had cast here recently. And Tamsin had been the one to leave the trail. They found her near the back, half-shadowed behind a slatted door. Her braid was tighter than Rowan remembered, but her eyes still shone that same conflicted warmth, like moonlight over oil. "You came," Tamsin said softly. "I always do." Calder stayed behind, watching the bar with wolfish stillness. Tamsin pressed a small slip of parchment into Rowan's palm. "Forged pass. Good for 3 nights. Fog ward seal and all." "And the song?" Rowan asked. Tamsin hesitated. Then she reached into her coat and pulled a tiny vial, a scroll no longer than a finger, bound in black thread. "She calls it the blood song. Says it was once a lullaby. But it's been warped." Rowan's pulse jumped. "It can break the tether?" Tamsin shook her head. "No. But it can weaken the spell if sung wrong. Change the cadence. But you have to mean it." Rowan's mouth went dry. "You tested it?" "I heard what it did to the others." "What others?" Tamsin didn't answer. Then she touched Rowan's hand, quick and tremulous. "Be careful. There are ears in the salt." Before Rowan could speak, Tamsin slipped past her, vanishing into the press of shadows and steam like she was never there. Calder didn't ask questions. Not immediately. He took the scroll from Rowan's fingers and turned it over. His expression didn't change, but his grip tightened. "Do you trust her?" he asked. "I used to." They settled into a table near the corner. The tavern had filled with new patrons, loud with drink and soot-laced laughter. A tray passed by, heavy with cups. Rowan didn't see who brought the drinks, only that Calder's cup wasn't the one he'd ordered. He drank it anyway. She watched the way his throat worked around the swallow, the way his hand returned to the table slower than before. A flicker of frown crossed his brow. And then he smiled, slightly, but wrong. Rowan leaned in. "What is it?" He blinked. "I'm fine." But he wasn't. His pupils were blown wide. Sweat glistened at his temple. When he reached for his knife, it clattered against the wood. "Calder." He began. But then she did it. Out of instinct. Out of old habit. Out of hope. She hummed the tune. A fragment. A note. It slipped from her lips before she could think, low and soft, the lullaby her father once sang in the smoke-dark nights. Just the first line. But it was enough. Calder gasped and fell. His chair crashed backward. His body hit the floor with a sickening thud, limbs seizing. The color drained from his face, and blood welled at the corner of his mouth. "No," Rowan breathed. "No, no, no." She was on her knees beside him, hands flying to his chest. He convulsed under her touch. Heat poured off his skin like wildfire, and his breathing came ragged, uneven. The bond between them seared in her ribs, screaming with pain. I didn't mean to. She pressed her hands to his chest, muttering a spell of grounding. But it did nothing. His pulse fluttered beneath her fingers, weak and erratic. Around her, the tavern had fallen into stunned silence. Someone get help, she snapped. But no one moved. No one except Sable. The huntress shoved through the crowd like a blade. Her eyes locked on Calder. Then on Rowan. She saw the blood. Saw the way Rowan was cradling his body. Saw the half-spilled cup. Her hand went to her blade. What did you do? She hissed. I didn't. You poisoned him. No. Sable lunged, and steel flashed in the lamplight. Rowan raised her arm to shield Calder's body, but the knife stopped inches from her throat. Because Calder groaned. His hand gripped Rowan's wrist. Tight. Alive. Sable's blade hovered in place. Her eyes flicked between them. I didn't poison him, Rowan said, voice shaking. He was poisoned before the song. I sang the blood song. I didn't know it would trigger it. You said it was a cure. It was. If the binding was set properly. If the spell wasn't twisted, she broke off, horror sinking deep. Isila, she changed it. She wanted this. Calder tried to speak. Failed. Rowan turned back to him. Don't talk. I'll fix it. I swear. Sable backed off, just enough to let her work. But her knife didn't lower. And neither did the suspicion in her eyes. Chapter 8, Trade Pain for Breath. Ashfen's longhouse had never felt so quiet. Or so close to death. Calder lay stretched across the infirmary cot, his breathing shallow, labored, sweat darkening his hairline. His shirt had been stripped away, torn from his body when the convulsions began, revealing muscles slick with fever and veins that pulsed and eerie, pulsing black-blue beneath his skin. Poisoned. And not by Rowan. Rowan stood at the foot of the bed, trembling with fury and horror, still clutching the vial of song ink she should have thrown into the fire. Her hand was stained with his blood. The saw mark on her wrist burned, the tether between them snarling with his pain. And Sable Rook had a knife to her throat. Give me one reason not to tie you to the gates and let the Moonwatch decide what you are, Sable hissed. Rowan didn't flinch. Because if you do that, he dies. He's dying already. And I can stop it. You sang the damn curse. I didn't know, Rowan snapped. I didn't know Isila changed it. I thought I could ease it. Sable's grip didn't loosen. But her gaze flicked, involuntarily, to Calder. His chest heaved like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His fingers twitched. He let out a broken sound, barely a voice. Rowan. One word. Barely air. But it was enough. Enough to cut through Sable's suspicion. Enough to make her lower the blade. Rowan didn't waste a second. She dropped to Calder's side, satchel already open, hands moving in muscle memory. A green root poultice. Violet paste. 3 cuts across her own palm. And the spell. She muttered it low, biting back the nausea as it took form. Take what is mine, what was meant for me, and give it unto me again. Switch pain. Her specialty. Her curse. The moment her blood touched Calder's skin, the tether roared to life. Pain poured into her. Not the soft ache of a pulled muscle or the sting of shame, but raw, invasive pain. Like barbed wire curling through bone. Like drowning in your own ribs. Her eyes rolled back as her spine arched, mouth open in a soundless scream. The world tilted. And then her body remembered. This was hers now. She let it in. Calder's breath evened. His skin cooled. And Rowan collapsed across him, convulsing, too weak to even pull away. Sable caught her before she hit the stone floor. Damn you, the huntress whispered. You're going to burn both ends out, witch. She saved him, came a rough voice from the doorway. Bran. He stepped into the room, soaked in rain, face unreadable. But his eyes flicked to Calder, alive, and then to Rowan, curled in a half-faint, sweat matting her hair to her cheeks. He nodded once. Then handed Sable a bundle. Old archives, he said. From the city. hidden under the old registrar's cabinet. What is it? Rowan slurred, trying to sit. Bran hesitated, then answered. Your parents' names. And the ledger of donations that kept their death from ever being investigated. Rowan went still. The tether pulsed. Calder's hand moved, barely, and found hers. Their skin touched. And the bond sang. Not like before. Not agony. Not fire. But something else. A resonance. A deep, magnetic pull that shivered down her spine and made her knees ache. The kind of pain that whispered of healing. Of purpose. Of something ancient and brutal and real. She felt Calder's breath at her cheek. Still breathing, he murmured. Rowan turned toward him, and their lips nearly brushed. Not from seduction, but from gravity. From the tether that didn't just anchor pain anymore, it began to want. He opened his mouth to speak, but she beat him to it. Don't move, she said. You'll ruin my very dramatic entrance. He huffed a laugh, then winced. She reached for her pouch again, hands shaking. Found the crushed mint gale root. Mixed it with water and green tea extract, and pressed the vial to his lips. Drink, she said. He tried. Failed. She cursed softly, then leaned forward and pressed her mouth to his, tongue slipping past his lips, gently coaxing the liquid into him. His body tensed beneath hers, but not from pain. His hands clenched in the sheets, and the tether between them tightened. Pleasure and pain braided in her nerves like vines. She pulled away, breathless, and whispered, Don't read into that. Calder blinked. Too late. Their faces were too close. The air too charged. The tether too hungry. Sable cleared her throat, pointedly. Rowan sat back, cheeks flushed, sweat drying on her skin. You're reckless, Sable muttered. Rowan nodded. And he's alive. Sable didn't argue. Bran set the archive bundle on the nightstand. There's a name in the donor log. Isila's. Not once. Twice. Under 2 aliases. Both linked to salt shipments. The same month the Vale house burned. Rowan's breath caught. And Calder's fingers closed around hers. Tighter now. Like he knew what was coming next. Then we go, Rowan said. Her voice didn't shake. To the archives, Calder echoed. No, she said. To the truth. Chapter 9. Ash and Paper. Blackridge was quieter at night, but it never truly slept. Even now, as the gas lamps flickered above soot-slick streets and fog slithered through iron railings, the city pulsed with breath. The kind drawn slow before a scream. The kind that preceded Ash. Rowan hadn't spoken since they'd left Ashfen. She sat stiffly in the corner of the narrow railcar as it rattled toward the city archives, her shoulders drawn in, fingers tight around the strap of her satchel. Inside, the pages Bran had recovered crackled against each bump. Truth, waiting to burn. Calder sat opposite, watching her like a man trying not to look directly at the sun. His eyes were steady, but she felt them, like pressure behind her ribs. Bran stood, ever silent, near the door. A sentinel in shadows. They reached the eastern platform under cover of fog, slipping through freight lines and salt crates stacked like broken teeth. The city archives lay crouched beyond the old courthouse, an ivy-covered relic with its glass dome stained from the coal days, rust bleeding down its seams. Are you sure about this? Calder asked as they reached the side gate. Rowan didn't look at him. I'm done living on second-hand memory. Bran picked the lock in silence. The door creaked inward. The air inside smelled of damp paper and old promises. Dust bloomed like breath. They moved like ghosts. Through hallways of shelved parchment and ledgers bound in cracked leather, past oil portraits that followed with eyes long dead. The archivist's desk was empty, likely bribed off by Bran or threatened into an early tea break. The back room, where criminal records and private ledgers were stored, held the Vale cabinet. Rowan's fingers trembled as she touched the drawer. Stamped across the metal, Vale R.A., Civil Fire, closed third bloom. She didn't breathe. She opened it. Inside, a single folder. Too slim. She pulled it out, spread its contents across the nearest table. One incident report. a charcoal rendering of the burned house, a list of possessions marked salvaged but unsorted, and a donation ledger. Rowan leaned closer. The numbers were exact. Too exact. 2 donations, made under different names, both in the same month her parents had died. One to the Salt Keepers Guild. One to the Ashfen Border Reconstruction Fund. She flipped the pages, pulse rising. At the bottom, faint but there. Donor initials, YC. Her mouth went dry. She ran her thumb along the edge of the folder, searching for hidden bindings. Her father had taught her that, once, how witches always leave folds for what they can't say aloud. She found it. A double crease in the bottom flap. She opened it with shaking hands. Behind the backing, a slip of parchment, old and brittle. She unfolded it. It was a receipt. For 12 barrels of consecrated salt and 6 flasks of cold iron extract. Labeled for fire purification ceremony. Paid in full by Isela Crow. Rowan staggered back. The chair scraped. Her satchel fell. She clutched the edge of the desk, suddenly unable to stand. The room spun. Her throat closed. The tether between her and Calder flared, not from distance, but from her. Pain. Deep, endless. Like loss born again. She had believed her parents were collateral. Victims of fire, or of wolves, or of politics. But they hadn't been killed by accident. They had been sacrificed. And she had been taken in by the woman who signed the fire. Rowan, Calder said softly. She didn't move. His voice was closer now. Come here. She didn't want to. She wanted to scream. To shatter the cabinet. To claw the mark from her skin. But her legs moved anyway. She stumbled, and he caught her. Arms strong and sure around her waist, the heat of his body grounding her in ways magic never could. She collapsed against him. Not elegant. Not poetic. Just real. Her hands clenched in his coat, her breath hitching. He said nothing. Didn't try to soothe her. Just held her through the unraveling. You were right, she whispered. It's all a lie. I'm sorry. She made me a weapon. Her voice cracked. She made me believe. I know. She pulled back enough to look at him, eyes wild with betrayal. I don't know who I am without her. You're yours, he said. That's enough. She blinked. And something inside her buckled. Not broke, but changed. Like frost melting under warmth. Slow. Reluctant. But inevitable. I have to dismantle it, she said. All of it. The salt mark. The network. Even if it kills me. You're not dying. It's not a choice anymore, Calder. This, she touched her wrist, the branded scar, the mark that had chained her since childhood, was never consent. It was ownership. And now? I'm done being owned. He didn't smile. But she felt his approval like a tide rising beneath her feet. They packed the papers in silence. Bran found a hidden drawer behind the cabinet, a concealed compartment behind a loose panel. Inside, a map. Hand-drawn. Ink faded. But clear. The caverns beneath the Salt Cathedral. A route that ended in bold script. Weeping Saltwell. Central chamber. Rowan stared at it. I think, she said slowly, that's where she's hiding. Or where she's waiting, Calder murmured. Bran glanced between them. We'll need the pack. No, Rowan said. We'll need you, Calder corrected gently. She didn't answer. Just looked down at her hand in his. Felt the tether hum. Then turned to the map like it was destiny inked in ash. Chapter 10, Trial by Pack. Ashfen smelled of pine sap and judgment. Dawn broke pale and sharp over the timbered roofs of the pack's longhouse, the mist still clinging low to the forest floor like it knew something sacred, or dangerous, was about to happen. From the heights of Muwatch Tower, the wolf song had called them. One long, winding note that pulled every soul within the pines to the pack circle, where law lived not in books, but in blood, oaths, and witness. Rowan stood alone at the center. The circle was wide, ringed with stone benches layered in lichen and claw marks. She could feel the weight of the stairs. Shifters in human skin and wolf form alike watched her in tense silence. Some curious. Some fearful. Others openly hostile. She wore no cloak, no weapons. Her salt mark was bared, glowing faintly as if in defiance. She didn't flinch. Calder had offered to stand beside her. She had refused. But now, as the crowd parted and he stepped forward, head held high, Alpha calm over his shoulders like armor, she felt the knot in her chest loosen, just slightly. He joined her in the circle. The moment he crossed the inner line, murmurs rose. Sable came next, her eyes sharp as ever, arms folded across her chest. Bran stood near the back, hands clasped behind his back like the sentinel he always was. Calder's voice carried like a storm over still water. "We gather under the first light," he said, "to decide if Rowan Vale stays among us, or is cast out for the pain she carries and the power she was bred to use against us." A long silence. Then a voice from the benches, a gray-bearded shifter with a scar across his jaw. "She's soul-marked. You know what that means. You bring her into our homes, and you bring the mother's eye with her." Another, "She poisoned you, Alpha." "She saved me," Calder replied without hesitation. Twice. The crowd shifted. Rowan swallowed. "You'd stake your life on her," came a new voice. Female. Firm. "On a witch who could bind your blood with a breath." "I already have," Calder said. And then, "I name her my Alpha's heart." Gasps. Someone stood. Someone else growled. Sable's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Rowan froze. He hadn't warned her. Calder turned to face them all, voice steady. "It does not mean I claim her as mate. Not yet. It means I believe her loyalty lies with Ashfen now. That I trust her not because of fate, but because of choice." The crowd roared. Confused. Divided. She stepped forward then. Her voice did not shake. "I was made to be your enemy," she said. "Groomed by a woman who fed on my pain and told me it was purpose." Murmurs quieted. "I believed her. For too long." Rowan raised her wrist, exposing the salt mark. "But this does not mean I am hers. Not anymore." She met every eye she could, especially the ones filled with doubt. "I've seen the network beneath your woods. I've walked the tunnels beneath your city. And I can take it apart. Not with fire. Not with war. But with choice. With undoing what they forced into us." Silence. Then, slowly, Sable stepped forward. Her eyes flicked to Calder. Then to Rowan. "You'll need help," she said. "To do that." Rowan nodded once. Bran crossed the circle and laid the map from the archives at her feet. "The salt well." Calder looked at her. "Will you lead us there?" "I will," she said. "But not for the mother. Not even for the pack. For those who were taken. For those still chained." He smiled, barely. "That'll do." And just as the wind shifted, a flicker of light bloomed in the air beside them. A mirror. Its surface shimmered, then warped. And from it, her voice. Mother Asila. Still beautiful. Still calm. Still poison. "Ah," she purred, silk smooth. "My lost daughter. So noble. So changed." The crowd froze. Rowan stiffened. Asila's image leaned forward, silver hair unbound, white robes trailing like fog. "I thought you'd burned that impulse out of yourself. But I see Calder has taught you bad habits." Rowan didn't move. Asila smiled. "You want your sweet little sister back? Tamsin is with me now. And she sings such pretty songs in her sleep." Rowan's hands curled into fists. "I offer a trade," Asila said. "Your loyalty. Your return to the Coven. In exchange for her life." A beat. Then the mirror went dark. Rowan's breath shook once. Just once. Calder touched her hand. No pressure. Just presence. And Rowan said, "I'll go." Chapter 11. The Weeping Saltwell. The salt cathedral loomed like a relic carved from bone and silence. Rowan stood in its shadow, the mist curling low around her boots, cold air clinging to her skin like the echo of 1,000 held breaths. Above her, stained glass windows watched the world with hollowed-out eyes, their saints long faded, their light drowned in fog. "This is it," she whispered. Calder didn't reply, but she felt him behind her, steady, close. The bond between them hummed, tighter now, not with pain but with something more dangerous. Resolve. He pressed his palm to the rusted iron door. "We go quiet." She nodded. And together. The door gave under pressure, moaning open into blackness. The descent began with stone stairs slick with salt moss, their steps worn to a hollow dip by centuries of Coven boots. Lanterns had long since rotted from the sconces. Rowan lit her palm with a witch-light flicker, green and soft, enough to show the path but not their faces. The salt came next. It clung to the air like grief. Bitter, caustic, ancient. And then, dripping. Soft, rhythmic, endless. Salt water fell from the ceiling like tears, drop by drop, hissing as it met the veins of consecrated iron in the floor. The deeper they went, the louder it became, until the tunnels trembled with the weight of it. At the bottom, the weeping salt well. A chamber carved into the earth's root, domed and glistening. Pillars rose from brine slick stone, wrapped in etched sigils that pulsed faintly with draining magic. At the center, a well of salt water, not drawn from ocean or river, but formed drop by slow drop from the crying rock above. And across that glowing basin, Mother Asila. She stood in full regalia, her silver hair loose, salt white robes trailing behind her like mist. She did not look surprised. Flanking her, Tamsin. Bound. Gagged. Eyes wide and shimmering with betrayal. "You came," Asila said, voice soft as wind through a crypt. Predictable, even now. Rowan stepped forward, the pain lancing through her ribs instantly. The tether jerked taut. Asila's smile sharpened. "Ah, yes. The bond. Such a delicate string. One I didn't break, but did tangle." Calder growled low, but Rowan raised a hand. "Let her go. She doesn't wish to be let go." Asila traced a finger over Tamsin's braid. "Do you little fox?" Tamsin whimpered. Rowan stepped further into the chamber. Agony ignited. Not from Asila. From the circle at her feet. The salt well reacted to distance, pulling the bond taut, distorting the magic meant to stabilize it. Every step away from Calder felt like knives dragging along her nerves. And still, she walked. "You've always been stubborn," Asila said, almost fondly. "You inherited that from your father. The rest? Mine." Rowan reached the first ring of the siphoning array. Runes glowed beneath the salt. They pulsed with each drop from above, collecting pain, memory, emotion, and pushing it through the salt-mark web. A siphon. A network of theft. "You built your immortality on the backs of children," Rowan said. "Is that your anger speaking? Or your guilt?" "I'm not your guilt anymore," Rowan said, and collapsed to her knees, bracing her palms against the whetstone as fresh pain racked her body. The bond snapped so tight she couldn't breathe. Calder was calling her name. But she couldn't stop. She reached the second ring, hands bleeding. Asila's expression shifted. "Still crawling to truth? Fine. Let me show you." She stepped to the edge of the platform and raised both hands. The sulfire ignited. The domed ceiling bloomed with flames, pale blue at first, then violently white, burning with memory. The carvings above roared to life, sigils of binding, of rewritten fate. "I didn't create your bond," Asila said, voice rising over the fire. "I rewrote it. Moved the lines. You were meant for someone else, Rowan." Rowan gasped, eyes wide. The pain made sense now. It had never aligned. "I bent it," Asila continued, stepping forward, "so that it would feed the well. Every tether fraying under your skin, every ache, it was by design." The bond between Rowan and Calder flared in protest. And still, he didn't move. He didn't try to drag her back. He held steady. Through pain, through distance, through her scream. Calder closed his eyes above the salt well, lips moving in silence. Rowan felt it. A pulse. Not hers. His. The pack sense, channeled through the bond, through his command, his focus. He was sharing her pain. Not to dull it. To anchor it. Rowan stood. Barely. Blood slipped from her nose. Her lips. Her palms. But she moved through the third ring. The core. At the heart of the siphon sat a stone basin etched in curses. Names. Sacrifices. Rowan pressed her hands to the stone, and the truth roared into her veins. This was built on her. On her father's death. Her mother's grief. Tamsin's obedience. Her pain. She reached back through the bond. Calder took it without words. Without flinching. Her magic surged. Wild. Raw. Hers. The siphon pulsed in answer. And the ceiling cracked. Isila snarled. No. The fire above them twisted, roared, then surged outward as stone gave way in a thunder of falling salt. Calder broke into a run. The world buckled. And Rowan whispered through the blood in her throat. Almost there. Chapter 12, Bond or Burn. The salt well was falling. Stone groaned and cracked as the ceiling gave way, ancient salt veins fracturing like brittle bones. Firelight bled through the fissures, white-blue sulfire that hissed as it kissed the siphon's runes, threatening to turn the chamber into a tomb of searing light and legacy. Rowan stood in its center. Bloodied. Trembling. Alive. Barely. The siphon array pulsed beneath her feet like a dying heartbeat. Every etched rune a stolen vow. Every ring a link in the chain Isila had wrapped around generations of witches. And she was breaking it. With her own body. Magic tore through her veins like wire, sharp and unrelenting. The saw mark on her wrist blazed molten gold, resisting the unweaving. Every step toward the core basin brought new agony, nerve deep, soul sharp, but she didn't stop. Her breath came in gasps. Salt slicked her skin. Her vision blurred. Calder reached her just as the second pillar collapsed. His arms caught her mid-fall. His heat steadied her even as the tether between them shrieked with pain. Rowan, he breathed. You can't. Yes, I can. Her voice was wreckage, soft but certain. But not alone. Their bond flared. Not as torment, but resonance. A spark. She looked into his eyes, and for the first time since the bond had begun burning them from the inside, she saw something new in it. Harmony. He closed his hand around hers. The moonbone ring on his finger gleamed, catching the white-blue firelight, and the pulse of the pack answered. Through the bond. Through blood. Through the pack sense. He opened himself to it. Not just to her, but to every wolf who had once been bound to pain, whose breath had hitched under the weight of inherited debt. And they answered. From the pines. The longhouse. The wetlands. A dozen threads of connection surged through Calder's chest, burning bright, and he let it all pour into Rowan. Not to save her. To strengthen her. Her spine straightened. Her legs held. Now, she whispered. Together, they stepped into the final ring. The siphon's basin flared like a scream. But Rowan reached into her satchel with a bleeding hand and pulled free a stone, small, dark green, pulsing faintly. A memory seed. She'd grown it for Tamsin. Meant it for healing. But she planted it now into the basin's core. Blood and chlorophyll soaked the sigils. And then she kissed him. Not soft. Not sweet. A spell made of skin and breath and bond, forged in fire and anchored in will. Their lips met in a crash of fury and salvation. The kiss pulled power from her marrow, from his core, from the tether between them that had once been broken and warped and twisted. Now it sang. Their kiss cracked the basin. Their kiss shattered the siphon. A scream ripped through the chamber Isila's. She stumbled back, the sulfire catching her robes, her spell unraveling. The light behind her warped, tearing through illusion. The false youth melted from her skin. Silver hair turned brittle, and her face aged in flashes as her stolen power turned to ash. Rowan broke the kiss first. Gasped. Swore. But Calder caught her around the waist, held her upright, his forehead pressing to hers as the ceiling groaned again. She's running, Rowan managed. Let her, he growled. You won. No. We cut the siphon, but the net. Calder turned. And through his voice. Low. Deep. Alpha command sharp. Bran. Get Tamsin. The echo of it vibrated through the crumbling stone. Bran was already moving. He appeared through the smoke, carrying Tamsin like a memory half frayed, her eyes dull, her lips parted in a breathless nothing. "Rowan," Bran called. "She's alive." But blink. Rowan stumbled to her, dropped beside her. Tamsin blinked. Once. Twice. No recognition. Rowan touched her cheek, her voice breaking. "Tam." "Nothing." She laid her head to her sister's chest. Heartbeat. Steady. But the salt mark had drained her. Emotion dulled. Mind fogged. Isila didn't just chain her, Rowan whispered. She emptied her. Calder knelt beside them. His hand found the small of Rowan's back. "We'll bring her back." Rowan nodded. Silent. Bloody. Still burning. Around them, the salt well cracked again. A final thunder. But the siphon was gone. The bond still tight, but no longer laced with pain. She turned to Calder. And smiled. Barely. But he saw it. And whispered, "You're mine." Not a claim. A promise. Chapter 13. After the shatter. The glass house smelled of damp moss and citrus blossom, though no sun reached the panes. Not anymore. Not after the siphon fell. Rain clung to the cracked glass roof, streaking the world in silver, softening the sound of Tamsin's uneven breaths beneath Rowan's trembling hands. On the bench of greenstone and iron, Tamsin lay still, eyes open but distant, watching nothing, remembering less. Rowan sat beside her sister, knees drawn up, fingers hovering above Tamsin's brow. She hadn't wept during the fall of the salt well. She hadn't screamed when the siphon carved its last scar across her ribs or when Isila vanished into ash and shadow. But now, with the battle past and her sister's smile absent, Rowan was splintering quietly. "I know you're in there," she whispered, brushing a thumb across Tamsin's temple. "You always were better at hiding than I was." Tamsin's eyes flicked toward her, faint recognition trembling at the edges. Rowan leaned in and pressed her forehead to Tamsin's. "Come back," she murmured, breath shaking. "Please." "You don't owe her anything now." She drew a green thread of spell light from her palm, life-fed, steady, glowing faintly like sunlight behind leaves, and let it seep slowly into Tamsin's chest, through skin and sinew. The ritual was ancient. Forbidden in most covens. A witch's version of a heartbeat jump. Not possession, but invitation. Rebuilding memory by memory. Feeling by feeling. It drained her. Slowly. Sweetly. And she would have given more. Until a heavy footfall broke her trance. Calder. His coat still bore scorch marks. Mud stained the hem of his shirt. But his posture hadn't faltered. Not since he'd carried them both out of the salt well like a storm wrapped around Marrow. He said nothing as he knelt beside her. Just let his fingers brush her wrist in quiet solidarity, his pulse anchoring hers. No command. No strategy. Only presence. She turned to him slowly. "She's not gone," she said, hoarse. "But she's numb." "She'll feel again," Calder said. "You make sure of that." "I don't know if I can." Rowan bit her lip. "I was meant to protect her, not break the chains after they've burned through her spine." Calder reached forward, his hand cupping the back of her neck, grounding her with his palm and scent. His voice, when it came, was low and graveled. "You did the one thing no one else dared," he said. "You chose her. Again and again. Even when she didn't choose you." Rowan blinked hard. "That's what love is, isn't it?" Calder nodded, slow. "And you taught me that." She didn't answer right away. Didn't need to. Their breaths settled into the same rhythm. Warm. Steady. Until Bran's voice rang through the glass house threshold. "They've blocked the causeway." Rowan and Calder both turned. Bran stood mud-splashed, his broad shoulders tense. A travel slick satchel hung over his back, and a rolled map was clutched in one fist. The lines around his eyes were deeper than usual. "Who?" Calder asked. "City Guard. Blackridge Militia." Bran's tone was flint. "Under some merchant syndicate's banner. Claiming the wolves breached trade boundaries. Spreading rumors about stolen salt stores and witch consort conspiracies." Rowan swore softly. "They're setting up a pretext." "Exactly." Bran tossed the map onto the table near the apothecary tools. "They want a border war, not a trial." Calder stared down at the crinkled parchment, then looked back at Rowan. And without speaking, they knew. They couldn't afford another Asila rising from salt and mirrors. Not when the port still burned with influence. Not when the rest of the Saltmark web remained unseen, slinking through ledgers and oaths. She reached for the vial of drying ink beside her, uncapped it, and began sketching over the causeway routes. No more curses, Rowan said. No more bindings hidden in agreements. If they want peace, they sign with truth. Calder stepped behind her, watched her work. Let his hand settle against the curve of her spine. You want to write a new treaty? He asked. I want to end the blood for salt cycle. Rowan's gaze flicked up. We give them an offer too clean to deny. Witches heal. Wolves guard. Humans trade. No prey, he said. No leash, she added. His hand slid higher along her back until it rested just below her shoulder blades. You'd trust them. I'll trust us to watch the loopholes. Calder smiled at that. But it faded when she turned to face him fully. Because something in her expression had shifted. Her defenses weren't gone, but for once, she let them bend. She took a slow breath and stepped closer. Her hand lifted, cupping his jaw with a touch that felt both fragile and inexorable. And then, finally, she kissed him. No pain. No spell work. Just skin and promise. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was earned. A slow descent into something that hummed like old roots under frost, like the first inhale after surviving fire. Calder broke away only when her forehead pressed to his. He opened his palm. The moobone ring rested there. His vow. He didn't put it on her finger. Didn't bind her with it. He placed it in her hand. I'm not giving it to claim you, he murmured. I'm giving it because you already lead beside me. Her fingers closed around it. Her thumb ran along the carved wolf's tooth edge. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because that night, they wrote new law in ink and blood and silence. Not just treaties, but the unspoken kind. The sort shared in breath and bruised palms, and every time he caught her before she stumbled. They would build this together. At dawn, the wind shifted. A sailor's cry echoed from the harbor rim. Bran appeared at the edge of the causeway with a look that had no room for rest. They've come, he said. Rowan stood, eyes narrowing. Who? He didn't answer. But the horizon did, where the salt fog rolled in thicker than it should. And with it, a silver-laced banner fluttered on a skiff carved in moon symbols. Tide pact. The older power. The older war. Chapter 14, Moonlight Terms. Moonwatch Tower rose from the pine-dark hill like a fang of old stone, its timbers groaning with the weight of centuries and snow. The wind curled around its spiraled edges, tasting of ironwood smoke and the cold hush before storm. Below, the pines whispered secrets, the causeway gleaming in fog-lit threads where it met the salt-stung world of Fog Harbor. Rowan stood at the high window, fingers pressed to the cold pane, watching the last shreds of mist lift from the marshes. Her shoulders bore the weight of every oath she'd broken, every one she was about to make. Behind her, Calder's voice was steady as fire on wet tinder. They'll demand more than ink. She didn't turn. Then we give them more than promises. He stepped close, so close she felt the heat of him even through the chill. No touch. Just nearness, like gravity remembered. We do this, and there's no taking it back. I'm not trying to take anything back, she said softly. Not the Saltwell. Not you. Not even what Asila made me. Finally, she turned. Her green eyes locked with his silver ones, steady and sharp. I want something new, she said. No binding scars. No hierarchies passed in blood. Just balance. Calder's gaze searched her like she was the answer to a question he hadn't dared voice aloud. What does that look like? Rowan took the treaty sheet from the table behind her, drafted in bark pulp parchment, sealed with moss oil ink. Her handwriting curled down the page like vines across stone. Not elegant, but honest. Written from someone who knew both sides of a leash. A threefold pact, she said. Witches for healing, wolves for border keeping, humans for trade and mediation. Mutual defense. Rotational oversight. Consent-based marks only. No salt brands. Calder's brows lifted slightly. They'll call it utopia. Or treason. Let them. Rowan's mouth curled wry. We've been called worse. Sable's voice cut through the chamber like an arrow. You're forgetting that Isila's not dead. They turned. Sable stood in the archway, mud on her boots and salt-blown cloak fluttering behind her. She looked like she'd run the whole causeway. She's joined them, Sable said flatly. The Tide Pact. Calder's jaw tensed. That's rumor. No, Sable threw a cracked wax seal onto the table. It bore the curling wave sigil of the Tide Pact, half melted by sulfire. It was delivered to the Storm Last Watch at Fog Harbor. A warning. They mean to send sea salt fog inland, through the brine marshes. To rot Ashfen from the roots. Rowan's breath caught. Fog like that doesn't just kill plants, she said. It silences magic. Weakens fur and claw. Turns bone brittle. Bran's voice rumbled from the corner, where he'd stood silently like the oldest tree in the grove. They'll drive us into the open, he said. Make us beg for another leash. No, Calder said. He stepped into the center of the tower's map room, his body casting a long shadow across the boundary lines and salt zones inked into the floor tiles. No more leashes, he repeated. We bring the whole pack tonight. Twilight fell like oil poured across pine. At the foot of the tower, the full circle of Ashfen gathered, wolves and witches, hunters and bondless, even traders who'd once sworn only to coin. No one spoke. Not until Rowan stepped forward, parchment in hand, voice low but clear. I stand here not as a witch, but as one who's been chained, freed and chosen again, she said. We can't undo what was done, but we can write something better. She raised the treaty. The ink shimmered green-gold in the torchlight, still fresh, still fragile. This is a vow of choice. No one bound without consent. No one punished without trial. Every voice weighed. Her gaze drifted toward Calder and held. I offer it because I believe in what we've begun. And I trust him. The wind stirred the hem of her coat. Somewhere above, a hawk cried once, sharp, distant. Calder stepped to her side, his tone deep enough to still the restless crowd. I was raised on the Moondet. I watched it break alphas stronger than me, he said. And I carried it anyway, hoping to be the last. His hand lifted, brushing Rowan's as he spoke, not quite clasping, not quite letting go. I've seen what happens when strength becomes law without love. This time, we lead with both. And then, one by one, the pack responded. Hands lifted. Some bloodied, some scarred, some bound with moss string or salted thread. The silence cracked into whispers, then a vow spoken aloud by dozens of voices. We keep the border and each other. Rowan's throat burned. Not from spellcraft. Not from salt. But from hope. From choice. From Calder's hand, finally sliding into hers. As the last echoes of the vow died beneath the trees, a sound rose beyond the tower. A sound that should not have been there. S-H-H-H-H-H-H. It came like surf through stone. A low-tide moan, wrong for the season. For the place. For the night. Bran stepped to the edge of the circle, nostrils flaring. That's not the sea, he said grimly. Another sound followed, higher, sharper. A train whistle. But the causeway was closed. The track unmanned. The rail schedule suspended since Isila's fall. And yet the fog rolled in again, thicker, faster. Like a tide pulled by the wrong moon. Calder pulled Rowan toward him instinctively. She didn't resist. What is that? She whispered. Not wind, he said. Sable's bow was already in hand. From the pines beyond the rail spur, a shape began to emerge. Slender. Silhouetted. A lantern swaying like a pendulum. And behind it, rows of figures in salt-slick cloaks. The Tide Pact had come ashore. Chapter 15. Brine and Oaths. The sea turned sullen beneath the storm-frothed light, casting the Blackridge docks in a bruised palette of pewter and bruised blue. Rowan stood just beyond the slanted spine of the brine market stalls, where salt-bloated canvas flapped like old lungs in the wind. From here, she could see the harbor curve into the Fog Harbor Causeway, and beyond it, the waiting line of tide-packed ships, their holes crusted with sea glyphs and hung with drowned lanterns. They had arrived with no warning but the fog. Thicker than cloud, colder than mist. It curled between crates of kelp and pickled fish, and it did not lift even under midday sun. And now the envoy had come ashore. He wore seaweed-lace-through ceremonial armor, algae green and sunless. His voice was low as surf over bone. "We come in peace," he said. "And we request a single thing." All eyes turned toward her. Rowan stood taller. The envoy continued, "The witch who burned the salt well. The branded one. Give her to us and no blood need follow." Behind her, she felt Calder's stillness like the drawn string of a bow. Not yet released, but ready. His pack flanked him, brand like granite, sable at his right shoulder, cloak already peeled back from her blades. But it was Calder who stepped forward. "She is under my protection," he said. No raised voice, no display of dominance. Just fact. The fog seemed to shiver. "And you think your pack can hold back a tide?" the envoy asked, mouth curling. "No," Calder said. "But I don't need to. I only need to ask the people of this harbor what they value more. Trade or terror?" Murmurs spread through the crowd. Vendors and fishermen paused. Some nodded. Some backed away. Rowan felt it then. Not a scent. A memory through her tongue, sharp and bitter, consecrated salt, but twisted. Marked by something older. Something deep. Her nostrils flared. Beneath the tide-packed envoy's robes, something throbbed. Not a heart. Not magic. But soulmark. Faint and mingled with sea kelp's brine. "Isila," Rowan breathed. Calder's head turned slightly, hearing the name like a curse. "She's not just allied with them," Rowan said. "She's feeding them." Soulmark web has merged with sea charm, twisting both. Sable muttered something about brine witchery under her breath. The envoy's eyes narrowed. "Then you understand the danger you protect." "We understand more than you think," Calder replied. "And we don't trade people like coin." The envoy smiled, slow and unfazed. "Then you are no better than the Coven you destroyed. You chain her by loyalty rather than spell." That stung. Rowan felt it in her gut, how easily truth could be weaponized. But Calder didn't flinch. "I never chained her," he said. And then, with a voice pitched not to argue, but to declare, "She chose to stand with me. And I with her." His gaze found hers through the fog. Rowan felt the words inside her before they reached her tongue. Felt the ache, the cost, the utter rightness. She stepped forward, her boots splashing in the brine-soaked dockwood. The crowd parted. "I chose him," she said, when it would have been easier to run. She took Calder's hand. "Not as a claim, but a bond. And I choose him still. If there is a price to bear, I share it." A hush swept through the market like the sea had inhaled. Even the envoy looked unsettled for a heartbeat. Bran gave a single approving grunt. Calder's thumb brushed her knuckles, barely there, but it shook something inside her loose. The envoy's smile cracked at the edges. "Then let the fog choose." He raised a fist, and with it, a ripple of magic pulsed outward. A call not to arms, but to weather. The air changed. Salt thickened. A whistle sounded from the direction of the Storm-Lass lighthouse. Wrong again. The wind carried it backward, from sea to land. Fog rolled in faster than it should have. Not natural. Not made by tide alone. Rowan turned sharply toward the causeway. "There's a ritual underway," she whispered. "One we're not meant to see." "Storm-Lass," Calder said. "That's where the signal's coming from." Bran's gaze went flat and cold. "Then we run. Before the next demand becomes war." Sable was already moving, cloak slicing the mist. "Wait," Rowan hesitated, watching the tide envoy retreat into the haze undeterred. She didn't trust the pause in conflict. It was too neat. Like the eye of a hurricane. Then a chill passed through her, deeper than cold. Not fear. Recognition. They weren't retreating. They were waiting. And something was being summoned. Calder turned to her, his voice low. "We go now. Storm-Glass holds the key or the edge." She didn't ask how he knew. Neither did she let go of his hand. Chapter 16, Storm-Glass Lighthouse. The sea had turned restless by the time they reached the base of Stormblast Lighthouse, its black ribs cutting into the salt-frothed dark like a dagger raised against the sky. Mist swarmed thicker here, crawling in wet tendrils along the breakwater steps. Waves lashed the rocks with a rhythm too steady to be natural, like a summoned heartbeat beneath the deep. Rowan inhaled carefully. The air was briny, yes, but not only that. It carried the unmistakable trace of waterweed soaked in old magic. Algae and ash. Witch salt and blood. The same mix she'd tasted on the envoy's breath, now multiplied and laced into every curl of fog. She opened her satchel with brisk fingers, ignoring how her knuckles trembled. "It's laced," she muttered, but not beyond countering. Sable crouched beside her, eyes narrowed against the wind. "You've got herbs to fight Seamus now?" "Not fight." Rowan took out 3 small bundles of resin-wrapped forest bloom, bruised seagrass, and ironwood shavings. "But shift. Fog can be bent. Just needs something greener than it." She knelt and pressed the bundles into the stone lip of the stairs, tracing a half-moon with a fingertip wet from her own blood. The plants hissed as they released a sharp, forest-sweet scent, moss and pine needles cracking the sea wind's hold. Calder watched her from above, body taut as a coiled spring. The lighthouse towered behind him, black glass panes flashing briefly with reflections of nothing she could place. Not stars. Not sky. Just a glimmer of something waiting. Rowan rose. "The fog won't blind us now. But once we cross the threshold, it won't matter." They entered as one, Calder at the front, Bran behind, Sable guarding the rear. Rowan's boots landed with soft thuds against warped wood planks, each step toward the heart of the lighthouse pulling at her ribs like the tide inside her bones recognized this place. It had been built by Ashfen hands, but something older had claimed it now. The stairwell wound upward in a spiral that smelled of rusted chain and burnt honey. As they ascended, Rowan felt Calder's pace slow just a fraction, the angle of his neck shifting as his breath came tighter. "Cold iron," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. She caught it too. That teeth-on-glass sensation at the base of the skull. Holy salt, laced with forged iron, nailed in place in crude runes along the walls. It burned against Calder's shape, denying him the space to shift. "They've layered it deep," Rowan said. "You won't be able to shift, not even partially." "Doesn't matter." Calder's voice was steel. "I don't need fangs to protect you." Rowan didn't thank him. She didn't need to. The air between them hummed with what had gone unsaid. They reached the final platform, where the lantern room sat beneath the cracked glass dome. The wind howled louder here, but it wasn't wind alone. It was a pulse, drawn from the sea and pressed into the mirror that waited in the center of the room. A wide basin of black water, rimmed in etched obsidian. The mirror. Rowan froze. Within its surface, images shimmered. Flickered. A woman's face, salt-pale and beautiful, eyes like silted glass. Isila. Behind her, suspended like a pendulum between breath and drowning, Tamsin. Bound with seaweed sigils, a tied knot of coral woven at her throat. Rowan moved forward, only for Calder's hand to close around her wrist. "Wait." But the mirror had seen her. Isila turned her head inside it. Smiled. "Ah, my errant pupil," came the voice, not from the glass, but from the room itself, as if the walls had drunk it in. Just in time for the unbinding. The water rippled. Tamsin's eyes fluttered. And above the basin, thin lines of light unspooled, threads, gleaming and ghostly, stretched taut between Tamsin's heart and... Rowan's own chest pulsed in answer. The salt mark. The threads trembled, then began to burn. No, Rowan stepped forward, reaching for the glyphs that ringed the basin. "She's using the binding to call the tide. She's trying to sever it." Isila's smile deepened. "A clean cut is better than the rot you've let fester." Rowan's limbs burned as she began the counter-chant, the one they'd never taught her in the convent. One she'd pieced together from ashroot and ruin, blood and rebellion. It tasted like old stone and sacrifice. But pain bloomed with every syllable. The glyphs pushed back. Wounds old and new licked open inside her. The branding scar at her collarbone went hot. Her throat thickened with salt. She faltered. Calder was beside her in an instant, palm catching her back, grounding her. "I'm here," he said low. "Use me." She did. Not through words. Through rhythm. Rowan angled her fingers to Calder's chest and found his pulse, steady under his skin. Matched her breath to it. Matched the chance cadence to that beat. Beat. Word. Beat. Word. The pain remained, but it stopped owning her. The mirror shivered. Isila's expression shifted, just slightly. A single note of Rowan's chant trembled too sharp. The mirror cracked. Light burst outward, sea chilled and bright, and from the depths below the lighthouse came a roar, a real one, deeper than any tide. Then the water reversed. Poured upward. The mirror imploded inward like a black sun collapsing. Tamsin vanished. The floor lurched. And the sea came for Rowan. A tendril of liquid shadow snapped around her ankle. Another curled around her waist. Salt flesh. Magic. Living tide. "Rowan!" Calder shouted. She reached for him. His hand met hers, but the water was stronger. It yanked. Air disappeared. Sound vanished. And Rowan Vale was dragged beneath, swallowed by sea and spell and silence. Chapter 17, The Tidebinder. Salt was the first thing Rowan tasted. Not the briny sharpness of ocean spray, but the dense, dry sting of consecrated grains packed into the air like smoke. Her tongue felt thick with it, her lips cracked. And beneath her, cold iron. Laid in careful chains along the floor, threaded through with green-black kelp. The tide vault was no natural cavern. It breathed like a beast, damp stone rising and falling with the sea's lung. Above her, the vault arched high, its surface carved with the inverted spiral of the Salt Covenant, each mark still slick from ritual damp. The lanterns flickered with brine-fueled flame, their glow a sickly violet. She tried to move. Chains bit into her wrists, crusted with sea crystals. Her ankles were locked by iron cuffs etched with anti-magic glyphs. One looped around her waist. She could barely draw breath. Isila stepped into view. Not the clean-robed matriarch of the cathedral, but something older, cloaked in silk shot through with barnacle thread. Her feet were bare. Salt shimmered up her shins like scales. And her voice, when it came, felt tidal. "You're awake. Good. I'd rather you hear this with your own ears than dream it through the blood." Rowan didn't answer. She worked her jaw, tested the gag of silence woven between her teeth. It cracked faintly. Not enough to break yet. Isila circled her slowly. "You look so much like your mother when she was brought here. Do you know that?" "Not in the eyes, no. Yours have fire." Hers had already gone out. Rowan's fingers curled into fists. Her salt mark pulsed. "She begged for Ashfen's safety," Isila said, almost gently. "As I offer you now. A trade. Your name on the sea pact. A drop of blood into the tide. And in return, no more wolves will die when the salt comes ashore." She crouched. "Your Alpha would approve, I think. A clean surrender. You for the rest." Rowan's answer was to twist hard against the chain. Pain lanced her collarbone, where the iron pressed. She spat blood to the stone between them. Still dramatic, Isila murmured. "But you will sign. Because you care too deeply, little Rowan. You always have. That's what we marked you for." Her hand hovered over Rowan's chest, where the salt mark still throbbed, still bound. Her fingers never touched, but Rowan arched as if burned. The cords of pain lit behind her ribs, tying heart to breath to memory. Then came the pull. The searing ache of being torn from Calder. No warning. No time to brace. Just absence roaring in, hollowing her. She bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. Screamed silent behind clenched teeth. It took everything not to weep. Then him. The shift was so sudden she thought it hallucination. But no. That scent, faint and clean amid the brine, pine resin and snow wind. Calder. He was close. Through the vault's rear channel, where water seeped around the old stone drain, he came. Not with claws out, not with fury, but with silence. He knelt just beyond the light of the lanterns. And when their eyes met, Rowan's heart nearly stilled. There was no plea in his stare. No fear. Just steadfastness. Isila sensed it before she saw him. Her head turned, lips curling in disdain. "You shouldn't be here, Alpha." Calder's voice was low. "I go where she hurts." Isila straightened, smoothing her robe. "If she dies, it is on your hands." "She won't," Calder said. "Unless you make it so." Rowan watched the stalemate from her knees, muscles trembling. She wanted to reach for him. She wanted to scream. But Calder only raised a hand. Not to fight. To speak. She makes her own choices. If she says sign, I'll walk. You'll have no war. Isila's eyes narrowed. You would give her up? I would obey her. Rowan felt something crack then. Not bone. Not chain. Something deeper. The agony of separation surged again, but she met it head-on. Let it burn. Because she understood now. This was not pain she would be rescued from. This was the pain of being known. Of being trusted. She dragged her head up. Blood on her lips. Throat raw. And spat the silence curse onto the floor. No. Isila turned slowly. I won't sign your sea pact, Rowan said. Her voice shook but held. Not to save them. Not to save him. Because this isn't salvation. It's theft. Of will. Of memory. Of self. She looked at Calder. I don't trade my name. Not even for you. His eyes gleamed. But he said nothing. Only nodded. Isila's face hardened. Then you'll burn when the salt claims him. Then we burn together. That broke the stillness like thunder. The air in the vault changed, went sharp metallic. Water hissed at the edges of the chamber. Isila's fingers curled. Then prepare. At dawn, you will kneel. The salt wedding proceeds. The bond you refused will be replaced. She gestured. Salt-gloved hands emerged from shadow, dragging Rowan backward, half-choked by chains. The last thing Rowan saw before the vault doors shut was Calder. Still kneeling. Still waiting. Not as a savior, but as an anchor. Chapter 18. Salt Wedding. Salt thickened the air until it hurt to breathe. From the edge of Breakwater Plaza, all the way to the steps of Stormglass Lighthouse, the sea fog had settled like a burial shroud, white, undulating, nearly opaque. Rowan knelt at the center of the circle, her wrists bound in kelp thread, her palms scored with the old salt marks flicker. The mist clung to her lashes, crawled down her spine, found every seam of pain the chains had left behind. She'd been cleaned. Dressed. Robed in bridal whites that weren't hers, salt silk, seawater pearls, a veil prickled with the thread of binding incantations. Her own heartbeat thudded in time with the tide, arrhythmic and wrong. This wasn't a wedding. It was a ritual drowning. The plaza echoed with slow, deliberate footfalls. 100 figures stood behind the veil, Coven acolytes, sea-bound witnesses, pale-robed monks of the tide contract. They watched in perfect silence. No drumbeats, no choir. Only the steady drip of brine from the tower above. And Isila. She descended the lighthouse steps like a swan descending water, her robe cut from fog itself. Her hands glowed with consecrated salt as she approached Rowan. The tides accept your offering, she murmured, as you offer yourself. Rowan said nothing. Her tongue felt stone-heavy in her mouth. The curse of stillness was setting in, an enchantment meant to slow the will, to make obedience taste like mercy. You may begin the vow, Isila said. The fog pulsed. The circle hummed. Rowan's voice cracked on the first syllable. By brine and bone. But then, the scream of a train whistle cleaved the mist in two. A shriek not of steel, but of rebellion, shrill, warping, unnatural in its intrusion. The salt mark flickered on her skin like a brand resisting itself. Chaos snapped the circle apart. From the edges of the plaza came crashing movement, sable first, her knives gleaming with forest pitch, not salt. Bran followed, his blade carving through the veil with merciless strokes. And then Calder. He moved like the storm had summoned him. Gray eyes fixed on Rowan. Hair matted with sea sweat. Arms bare to the shoulder. The moonbone ring glinted as his hand tore through the nearest arc light lantern, casting sparks into the broom. "Touch her," he growled at the acolytes, "and you forfeit your throat." Isila's face didn't change. "You defy the salt wedding? I defy you." Calder reached her in 3 strides, and Rowan's bindings broke in that same breath, not from force, but from resonance. Because he touched her. Bare skin to bare skin. Palm to palm. Their marks flared, and the agony of separation, so long dulled by ritual and suppression, returned like fire through bone. It should have broken her. Instead, she took it in. Moondet echoed in her chest, and she turned it. Pain became pressure. Pressure became focus. And from her throat rose not a scream, but a song, a war chant in the old forest tongue, twisted at the end into the salt sigil counterspell Isila had once taught her. Calder didn't let go. He matched her. Their lips found each other before thought intervened, desperate, searing. Not tender. Not soft. Acclaiming. Her hands clutched his jaw, nails scraping his stubble. His fingers wove into her soaked hair. They kissed as if the world would split for it, and in some way, it did. The sea screamed. The fog peeled back. And the enchantment holding the salt wedding shattered. Acrid smoke rose from the circle's edge, where consecrated salt met moobone and died. The tide surged up the breakwater stairs with unnatural speed, pulling robes, feet, and weapons into churning foam. Isila staggered. But her power wasn't gone. From her mouth spilled a spell of unraveling, older than the Covenant, older than memory, and the earth beneath Rowan cracked. Stormglass groaned. Then opened. The stone tiles of the plaza split around the lighthouse foundation. Beneath them, a spiral stair of blackened coral descended into ink. Too late, Isila hissed, vanishing with the mist. The vault remembers. Calder reached for Rowan again, but the floor beneath her feet shifted. A pull, not physical but ancestral, drew her downward. She gasped once and was gone. Into the dark. Into the place where the sea kept its truest secrets. Into the drowned past. Chapter 19, Drowned Archives. Water pressed against Rowan's skin like a second, colder one. It filled her ears, stung her eyes, soaked the salt mark along her ribs until it buzzed like a live wire. The descent had been silent, pulled through a chute beneath the lighthouse, into depths that smelled of rust and old memory. When her boots struck stone, the world had changed. No sky, no sound, no breath that wasn't filtered through brine. Only the drowned dark. The drowned archives lived up to their name. Silt-covered vaults stretched like ribs into blackness, arches half collapsed under barnacled runes. Water lapped gently around waist height, stirring ancient pages and broken seals. The light from Rowan's palm glow spell barely touched the edges of the chamber. Behind her, Calder surfaced with a grim snort. His shoulders broke the water like a prow, moonbone ring glinting even in the murk. "You all right?" "I think so," she murmured, steadying herself on a rusted chain that snaked along the wall. "The salt's thicker down here. It tastes old." Calder scanned the room. And wrong. They moved forward together, boots sending swirls through centuries of settled dust and secrets. Somewhere in the dark, water dripped in rhythmic plinks, steady as a metronome. A warning or an invitation. Runes carved into the wall began to respond to her pulse. They pulsed, green over rust, revealing script written in overlapping tongues, coven glyphs, sea witch etchings, and something older still. Rowan trailed her fingers along one line, feeling its hum. "It's a contract," she whispered. "Not just one. A trifold pact. Witch. Wolf. Sea." She found the first of the scroll vaults, encased in pearl-laced glass, bound with ironweed. Her magic resisted the iron, prickling painfully against her ribs, but Calder stepped forward and broke the seal with bare hands. Inside lay a scroll, half decayed and half glowing. When Rowan opened it, the ink swirled into motion, forming an image of 3 figures, one crowned with salt, one cloaked in leaves, one shadowed by a full moon. Beneath them, if the destined bond be severed by artifice, Let the coast rot, the packs unravel, the tides rise unbound. Her breath caught. They knew, she said. They knew tampering with the May bond would ruin everything. Calder stepped beside her, his expression like carved stone. That's what she's been doing. Isila didn't just trap you. She's been twisting fate itself. And it's bleeding out into everything. Rowan dropped to her knees in the water, the scroll cradled like a wounded animal. The wildings in Ashfen, the broken salt marks, even Tamsin. A splash echoed from the far end of the chamber. She turned. Tamsin stood half-submerged in a collapsed archway. Her braid was loose, eyes unfocused, lips moving without sound. She looked half-drowned, pale as a ghost, but she was awake. Tamsin? Rowan's voice broke with salt and grief. The younger witch blinked, slow and thick. Rowan. She waded forward, arms trembling. Mother said you left me. That you chose them. Rowan's heart twisted. She lied. Tamsin's lips quivered. I know now. But it's like parts of me are missing. I don't feel whole. She lifted her hand, where a faint shimmer of seaweed sigil pulsed under her skin. I let her anchor something inside me. I'll help you tear it out. Tamsin gave a shaky laugh. I don't think it's that easy. Rowan stepped forward, water curling around her thighs, reaching her with a slowness that felt symbolic. She placed her hands on Tamsin's shoulders. I failed you. I let her take you from me. But if there's any way forward, it's through here. Together. I can't lead, Tamsin whispered, voice cracking. But I can follow. A moment passed between them. Then Tamsin turned, pointing toward the farthest wall of the chamber, where a massive vault door lay submerged in shadow and barnacle. She said it was the original seal, she said. What holds the core contract? She meant to destroy it. Rowan turned toward it, but Calder caught her arm. Wait. He stepped closer, shoulders brushing hers. You feel it. She did. A slow, grinding presence beneath the vault. Ancient. Locked. Not with spell, but with intention. Something woven. Something waiting. She swallowed hard. There's a key. There always is. And then, very slowly, Calder reached for the moobone ring on his finger. Rowan's eyes widened. No, Calder, that's... My family guarded this land long before Isila ever opened her first salt scroll, he said. If that door needs blood and bone and vow, then fine. It'll have mine. He didn't remove it. Not yet. Just pressed the ring to the center of her palm. She gasped. It burned. Not with fire, but recognition. Her skin bloomed with memory, the taste of his kiss in the sea mist, the pressure of his body wrapped around hers on the floor of Moowatch, the throb of pain and wanting that had marked their first true meeting. The ring pulsed like a heart. I'm not giving it to you, he said softly, but I will let you choose what to do with it. She looked up at him, throat closing. I don't know if I can, she whispered. I've done so much wrong. His thumb traced the salt mark scar on her ribs. Then let this be the first thing you do right. Beneath them, the tide shifted. And behind the vault door, something ancient began to stir. Chapter 20, Moobone Ransom. The lock awaited like a throat before the knife, silent, gleaming, carved in a script no one had spoken aloud in centuries. Rowan's hand hovered over it, Calder's moobone ring cradled in her palm, still warm from his skin. The tide beneath the tide vault core had stilled. But the air was damp with a hush that warned. This silence had teeth. He stood behind her. Unmoving. Watchful. You don't have to, she said again, for the 5th time. And yet, Calder replied, here we are. She turned to face him. Salt clung to his lashes. A wound at his collarbone leaked down in a thin line, mixing with brine. He looked like a man already claimed, by duty, by danger, by her. I can try another way, Rowan said, softer now. A bypass, a backdoor glyph. There's a binding plant I haven't. No. It was built to answer my family's vow. My blood. My name. My bone. His gaze dipped to the ring in her palm. Let it do what it was forged for. And if it takes more than the ring? He didn't flinch. Then it'll have to fight me for the rest. She breathed once. Deeply. Then place the ring against the carved moon socket in the center of the stone seal. It sank in. The vault didn't creak or groan or roar. It breathed. The sigils lit, pulsing once in silver white, then fell dark as if some deep recognition had been made. The door released with a cold hiss, sliding open into the core. They stepped into stillness. The core of the tide vault was not made of stone or metal, but mere slick glass veined with salt veins. One wrong echo, and it might shatter underfoot. At its heart stood a plinth, crystalline and humming, atop which hovered an orb of braided algae and ember-threaded light. The sea sigil. The original anchor of the oldest oath. And Mother Isila was already there. She stood in white, a figure cut of salt and porcelain, her silver hair pinned in coils, her hands raised to the orb. Between her fingers, filaments of green flickered, yanked from a hunched figure kneeling beside the plinth. Tamsin, Rowan breathed. Her sister in bond twitched, a marionette caught mid-tremor, eyes wide with too many spells filtered through too much fear. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Isila turned. "You brought the ring," she said, serene as always. "Good. That will save us all considerable time." "Step away from her," Calder growled. But she didn't. She smiled. "You misunderstand. This isn't coercion. It's succession. The sea does not forget her chosen. She's not yours to offer. And yet she bled for me. That is the first seal of any vow." Rowan moved forward, magic a whisper under her skin. She could feel the green thread Isila held, rooted deep into Tamsin's emotional matrix, overlaid by saltmark anchors and soaked in sea sigil resonance. Severing it would require more than strength. It would require trust. She dropped to her knees beside Tamsin, reaching into her pouch with trembling fingers. "Do you trust me?" she whispered. Tamsin blinked, disoriented. "I don't know where I end anymore. We'll find you. I promise." From her pouch, Rowan withdrew the silky moss and pine-threaded root she had gathered days ago, one from the sea, one from the forest. She braided them with whispered spells, weaving memory and smell and heartbeat together, and pressed the weave against Tamsin's chest. Tamsin gasped. The magic crackled. Isila hissed, fingers recoiling as if burned. The bond faltered and Rowan dove into it. Not physically, but through emotion, pouring her memories into Tamsin's fracture, laughter in the glass house, salt-bitter tears in the Ashfen rain, whispered dreams over bloodied hands. Tamsin's voice broke into a sob. I remember the greenhouses." The salt mark on her wrist flared, and then sputtered out. Calder exhaled a sound like a storm being held back. Rowan turned to him, smile shaking. "She's here. She's back." But Isila was already moving. With a single, sharp gesture, she snatched the sea sigil from its plinth. It screamed in a frequency Rowan felt in her teeth, in her bones. The chamber buckled. "You fools think I would let sentiment rule," Isila said, voice warping with magic. "The tides obey no heart. Only force." The sigil pulsed once, twice, and vanished into her robes. Then the flood began. Not a metaphor. Not a spell. The ocean rose. Through the vault's back vents, water came in a roar, centuries of restraint shattered by a stolen seal. Calder's hand seized Rowan's. Tamsin stood unsteadily, coughing, clutching the half-finished braid of moss and pine. The three ran as the core shattered behind them. Up the narrow hallways of the vault. Past flooded archways. Salt crystals melted to sludge beneath their boots. Seaweed lashed like whips through the stairwells. At the final threshold, water already up to Rowan's hips, Calder turned to her. "Give me the braid." "What?" "Your magic saved her," he said. "Now let mine buy time." She pressed the wet braid into his hand. "Don't, Calder." He kissed her. Hard, fast, unshakable. Not for goodbye. For grounding. Then he shoved her up the steps. She screamed his name, but Bran's arms caught her at the top. Sable behind him, bleeding but grinning. "Told you he was too stubborn to drown." A moment later, Calder burst up from the vault stair, soaked to the bone, seaweed tangled in his sleeves, but alive. Tamsin collapsed in Rowan's arms, half laughing, half sobbing. Behind them, the sea continued to rise. On the docks of Blackridge, bells were already ringing. Sirens howled. People fled inland. And from the harbor mouth, a thick white fog unrolled like a tongue. Rowan turned to Calder. His eyes were dark, unreadable. But when she stepped close and rested her brow against his, she felt his answering tremor. Not fear. Faith. "I'll return your moo bone," she whispered. His hands settled on her waist, grounding her like stone and tide. "Keep it," he said, "until we earn something better." Behind them, the water surged again. Fog Harbor Causeway waited, and Isila's reckoning rose with the tide. Chapter 21. Last Train Through the Fog. The fog was thick enough to taste brine and rust, salt and soot, the scent of war turning the wind raw. The narrow gauge rail clanged beneath boots and wheels, a steady rhythm of urgency echoing across the Fog Harbor Causeway. Steam hissed from the engine as Bran secured the last of the cargo, more wounded than goods, and Sable paced along the rear cars like a sentry too tired to rest, but too stubborn to fall. The wolves were loading pups into the cars, wrapping them in patchwork blankets, silent under the weight of fear disguised as resolve. Rowan stood just beyond the platform, hands outstretched toward the soil-stitched planks of the causeway. She chanted softly beneath her breath, coaxing the bristle-leaved saltgrass to unfurl from her satchel and take root. The stalks stretched toward the mist like antennae, absorbing the charged water in the air, forming a grid against the tremor of sea magic creeping along the stones. Each blade shivered, warding, whispering back at the coastal tide with stubborn green defiance. Her saltmark pulsed against her collarbone, duller than before, but not gone. Just hidden beneath the hush of fog and firelight. She glanced over her shoulder once, then again. "Where is he?" The train moaned, couplings shrieking. The first whistle would sound soon. Still no Calder. Then the wind shifted. Not the sea wind that curled like cold fingers around the causeway, but a rush of animal scent, pine sap, smoke, salt, and silver. Calder burst from the tree lean on the other end of the platform, clothes torn and blood-streaked, a snarl still riding the back of his throat. His eyes were too pale, too wide, nearly feral. He was almost shifted. The pain of it clung to him like steam. Rowan met him at the platform's edge before Bran or Sable could move. One glance told her everything. The moon debt was flaring again, fed by the push and pull of too many oaths, too many overlapping ties. His body had absorbed more than it could hold. Calder. Her voice cracked around the name. She reached for him, but he flinched from her touch. "Stay back," he rasped, fangs just visible, voice deeper than it should be. "I can't." She stepped closer. "You can. I feel it under my skin. Tearing. Gnawing." His hands trembled as if the claws wanted out. "Then let me be the tether," she said. "Just for this moment. Just until the last child is safe." She stepped into him, slid her hands along his jaw, up to his temples. Her touch was cool, the way riverbanks soothe fever. The green magic coiled from her palms, not to bind but to remind. She leaned in, lips brushing his ear, and began to sing. Not a song for battle or breaking, no sharp notes, no crescendo. This was a cradle song. Old and slow, half-hummed, half-breathed. The kind passed down through forest mothers and midwives, through sisters who sang to scared girls under starlight. She let the rhythm roll from her throat into him, as sure as the tide, as steady as moss growing on stone. His breathing slowed. Shoulders dropped. The snarl died in his chest like a flame denied air. His forehead found hers. The fog thickened around them, curling like a veil. Train smoke spiraled into it, scenting the air with cinder and iron. Beneath that cover, his lips found hers, rough at first, then reverent. A kiss not of heat, but of breath, shared, sought, stolen. It wasn't a kiss of triumph. It wasn't victory. It was the kiss of two people still bleeding, still afraid, still standing. A kiss at the eye of the storm, with every shadow howling just outside. She trembled into him. He braced around her. When the whistle blew, they didn't part. When Sable shouted, they still didn't part. It wasn't until Bran growled, "Now or never," that they pulled away, and even then Calder caught her hand and held it like a lifeline. They boarded together. Inside the train, the wounded lay on narrow bunks. Cubs clutched old toys. Rowan moved through the rows, checking poultices and muttering protective words while Calder stood near the door, every inch the Alpha, his hand never far from his blade. Outside, the mist thickened. From the last car, Sable leapt aboard, a fresh slash along her arm. "They've started," she said between breaths. "See magic on the wind. Tastes like rot and old blood." Bran took position at the rear hatch, weapon drawn. "We'll have to ride hard." The engine groaned forward. The train began to move. And then the tide screamed. It wasn't water. Not really. It was the magic that lived beneath it. A roar of betrayed packs and broken bindings. It surged along the tracks in a wall of mist and memory, chasing the train like a curse with teeth. The pups began to cry. The wounded moaned. Rowan ran to the last car, fingers already casting. She flung a circle of saltgrass across the rear deck, laced with her blood, binding it with an anchoring spell. She touched the track below, called to the iron beneath. "Hold," she whispered. "Hold." The train jolted, then steadied. Mist slammed into them. The car shuddered. Lights flickered. In the chaos, Calder's eyes burned again, the beast rising. "Rowan," his voice broke. She ran to him, caught his jaw between both hands. "No," she whispered. "Not now." He trembled. "It's too much." "Then let me carry you. Just this once." And she kissed him again. Not slow this time. It was a kiss forged in pressure and flame, in the way the train swayed and the fog hissed and the salt crackled against the warded hull. She poured every last thread of control into it. Into him. Into this. When they broke apart, their foreheads pressed together. "We're almost through," she breathed. He nodded. "With you." Smoke curled above. Sea fog surged below. They stood in the space between. Alive. And then came the sound, the whisper of a tide changing direction. Rowan turned sharply. Beyond the fog, at the breakwater's end, a shadow pulsed, something ancient and rising, summoned by no storm. A challenge. A promise. Isila's voice, soft as a lullaby and twice as cruel, echoed through the mist. Moonrise, Rowan Vale. You know what must come next. Chapter 22, Breakwater Oath. The moon rose over Breakwater like a blade unsheathed, pale and glinting through rifts in the salt-thick clouds. Its glow cut across the ruined plaza, fell in silver on cracked stone and wind-tossed banners, and bathed the lighthouse in an otherworldly sheen, as if even time had paused to hold its breath. Rowan stood at the heart of the circle, her boots bleeding seawater, fingers damp from the rune blood drawn on her own forearm. Around her, the shattered saltmark rings still pulsed with residual sigils, the last threads of Isila's conjuring hissing into vapor. Her lungs stung with brine, her bones ached from the siphoning. But her voice held. Calder was at her side, though not touching her. Not yet. His shoulders were squared, eyes storm-hued and unreadable, but the tension in his stance betrayed him. Every part of him strained toward her, even now. Especially now. Before them, Mother Isila knelt, blood at her temple, robe soaked and unraveling, the salt-pearled embroidery now a mockery of sanctity. Her gaze remained crystalline calm, as if none of it touched her. "You think this ends with your little performance?" Isila's voice curled like incense. "You've won nothing but delay. The deep court does not forget." "No," Rowan said softly, not looking at her. She turned instead to the tide-beaten crowd that lined the broken steps and crumbled watchposts, Ashfen wolves, Greenwich allies, harbor folk who once feared her. Tamsin stood just beyond them, flanked by Sable and Bran. The younger witch's face was pale but steady, no longer hollowed by fear. "Not today." Rowan stepped forward. Her magic stirred the salt air, a quiet rustle like wind through long grass. Her skin glowed faintly, no longer from inherited pain but from chosen offering. The lifecraft she'd pulled from root and marrow now seeped outward in bloom. "This ends because we choose it to," she said, voice low but unfaltering. "No bond holds unless two souls meet in consent. No oath binds without a will behind it." Calder's fingers brushed her back. A grounding touch. A vow offered not in dominance, but solidarity. Behind them, the gathered wolves murmured, their hum growing, an instinctual group thrum of presence, not command. He amplified it, not to silence her, but to let her be heard. Rowan drew a slow breath and stepped into the full arc of moonlight. Her fingers grazed her throat, then lifted high, cutting through the salt fog like a wand stroke. "I offer this vow freely," she said. "Not out of blood debt, not out of fear, but because I would rather walk into ruin beside him than survive a peace he's not in." Gasps flickered like lanterns through the crowd. Calder moved then, fast as breath, folding his palm into hers. His voice, hoarse and edged in heat, followed hers. "And I swear to meet her there, in ruin or in peace, to fight at her side, not for her leash." They stood beneath the lighthouse like flame and flint, worn, marked, but unbroken. The moment caught and held. And then Asila laughed. A soft, amused sound that rasped from the back of her throat like rust flaking from cold iron. "Foolish," she murmured. "You still don't understand what tide you've turned." Tamsin stepped forward before Rowan could speak. "Enough." Her voice shook, but only once. "You wanted my loyalty? Then take this. I testify that Mother Asila bound us by salt marks crafted to siphon, to twist. Not preserve. Not protect. You did this not for our safety, but your hunger." The silence that followed was deeper than rage. The kind of quiet that came before verdict. Two lanterns near the far arch flickered with blue flame, strange, unnatural. A shadow passed through the broken gateway, cloaked in robes darker than sea-deep ink. A herald, not from Asila's circle, but older. Stranger. Their voice rang like steel dragged through salt. "The deep court acknowledges breach. You have 30 moo turns to stand trial." Calder's jaw tightened. Rowan shifted closer, instinctively, and felt his pulse leap under her touch. The figure disappeared as fast as it had arrived, leaving only the echo of threat behind. Rowan turned, meeting the eyes of her allies, her people. This battle had ended. The war was still crusting. And yet, her hand remained in Calder's, their knotted fingers stronger than sigils, more vital than any ring. The moon deck quieted, not vanquished, but tamed. A heartbeat that no longer ruled, but resonated. They had not chosen this bond, but they had chosen each other. And the tide was listening. Chapter 23, Choosing Ashfen. The longhouse smelled of moss, slick timber and damp wool, hearth ash and the lingering sharpness of wolf musk after a night half-shifted. The walls, latticed in aged pine, thrummed with pack heartbeat, steady but strained. Rowan stood at the edge of the fire pit, arms loose at her sides, the last embers of the moon-watch tower's beacon light still caught in the edges of her hair like war paint. Her boots were soaked. Her voice was dry. And every elder present could smell that she hadn't slept. Sable leaned against the post near the northern door, arms folded, eyes fixed like a hawk's on every twitch of tension. Bran stood on the far side, behind Calder, all unmovable stillness and the watchful guard of one who'd bled for his alpha too many times to allow another mistake. The circle had been drawn in consecrated chalk and salt root. The elders sat in its bounds, lips pursed, claws hidden but not sheathed. A few side-eyed Rowan like she was a ticking charm bomb. Others, like Ira Flint and old Harvin of the Marsh Ward sentries, had the war-weary lean of those who'd survived enough to listen. "We've sheltered witches before," someone growled from the shadows near the stairwell, but never one with a deep court price on her head. "She's the reason the causeway didn't drown in tidefire," Sable said, unblinking. "She's the reason they want to come burn us out of the trees," another spat. Rowan did not flinch. She stepped forward, breath steady. "Let me be the reason they don't." Silence spread like fog. Cold, creeping. Rowan let it settle. I'm not asking for safety. I'm asking for a function. Use me. Let me go as envoy or envoy. One who's been branded, broken, and burned by the same forces now binding the Deep Court and Salt Syndicate together. I can speak to them in their own tongue. I've bled their rituals and survived. You'd spy? Harvin asked. No. I'd bargain. For your terms. Not mine. Eyes turned to Calder. He hadn't spoken since the ring exchange. Since Rowan had touched his chest before the gathered, her palm over the place where his pulse thudded as a wolf's would echoed in hundreds. Now, Calder stepped forward. She came to Ashfen a bound enemy, he said. She remained when she could have fled. She's fought for this land, for the cubs we just ferried from Fog Harbor under fire and salt storm, and she didn't ask once for mercy. I give her shelter. A murmur rippled. And more than that, Calder continued, voice low but sure, I give her standing. As of today, she is under the Alpha's protection, acknowledged, affirmed. Anyone who defies that steps into blood debt with me. The declaration struck like the toll of iron against shield. Rowan swallowed, throat tight. Then, from the tower's high window came the sound of wind chimes strung with sea glass. Not natural. Not Ashfen-made. A wind that didn't belong crept in, curling around Rowan's ankles like a warning. The messenger was already approaching, lantern bobbing on the causeway path. Deep Court heralds wore no colors. Only salt white robes that bled into mist. The one that approached was tall, faceless under their hood, and the scroll they unrolled was edged in dried seaweed. It was Bran who took it. He read silently, jaw clenching. Speak it, Calder said. Bran's voice cut like frost. They demand Rowan Vale be surrendered within 48 hours. If not, they'll invoke sovereign flood. Full tide retaliation. No safe ground within a league of the coast. Several elders muttered curses. Rowan's breath came slow. Not surprised, but deeply bodily tired. She stepped toward Calder before her nerves could argue. He looked down at her, eyes storm-dark. She lifted her hand. Pressed her palm, again, to the place over his heart. I choose Ashfen. The words were soft, but the soul mark burned hot at her nape as if scorched by a truth too sacred to undo. She didn't drop her hand. And Calder, stern, guarded, loyal to the bone, bowed his head the barest inch. I choose with you, he said. We'll carry this weight together. A pause. Breath held across the longhouse. Then, one by one, the pack began to rise. Not in applause, but in readiness. Ira Flint picked up her cane. Then we prepare for judgment. Sable nodded once. Salt Cathedral. The tide was coming, but Rowan had never stood straighter. Behind her, the lanterns in Muwatch Tower burned steady through the mist. Chapter 24, Try to Love. Ashfen had never been so quiet. Even the pines held their breath, their wet needles glittering with moonlight dew as though some ancient frost had wept over the marsh and left behind its ghost. From the wrought iron paths of the conservatory down to the herb-stilled pools where Rowan soaked in silence, the entire wetland seemed to have curled inward, watching. She floated in the copper tub Calder had brought in from the Alpha Longhouse himself, the water steeped in crushed chamomile, milkweed, and ghost root. The bruises under her skin, magical and otherwise, ached, but not with pain. Not anymore. She had chosen this body. This bond. And pain, finally, was not the cost of being touched. Her arms rested on the edge, lips parted just above the steam, eyes half-lidded. Her auburn hair clung to her back like curling river weed, drifting with every soft exhale. From the far side of the greenhouse, beyond the glass-veiled pines, she felt him. Not in the old way, not like before, when the moon debt had forced every beat of her blood into step with his, but in the new silence he arrived. A presence, not a command. A weightless gravity that pulled only because she let it. Calder paused outside the wide arch of the conservatory, boots silent on the mossy flagstone, the scent of ash and iron softened by the low burning lanterns. She turned her face toward the door. Come in, she said, before he could knock or hesitate. Her voice carried like a tide ripple, gentle, but full of old strength. He stepped inside. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, collar unfastened, moonbone ring absent from his finger. The absence of it struck her, not like a threat, but a reminder of what he had given, of what he had lost, of what he had refused to demand in return. Too hot, he asked softly, nodding to the tub. Rowan shook her head. It's perfect. The herbs are holding. A beat, then, the pain's quiet. His shoulders lowered at that, and something nearly reverent crossed his face. The silence between them deepened. Then she lifted her hand from the bathwater and extended it, droplets streaking down her arm like starlight falling. Touch me, she said. Only if it doesn't hurt. Calder crossed the space between them slowly, like walking through a dream he was afraid to wake from. He knelt at the edge of the tub and took her hand in both of his thumbs pressing gently into her palm as if memorizing the shape of her want. Rowan's breath caught, but not from pain. Just pressure. Warmth. Wait. A beat passed. Then another. She brought his hand up, laid it against her cheek, and leaned in. His scent, pine smoke, salt wind, iron, and earth, was layered with the faintest trace of green things. Her green things. Her choice. He inhaled, slow and deep, and didn't speak. Didn't move more than to match her breath. We're not rehearsing power anymore, she said, voice raw with the truth of it. No vow, no magic, no moon debt left to anchor us. His jaw tensed. I know. Then let this be real. She opened her eyes fully, met his. Let this not hurt. I've never wanted anything more, Calder murmured. She shifted in the tub, water parting in gentle laps. He didn't look away as she rose to her knees, bare and pale and scarred in all the places she once wished were hidden. Her soul mark caught the light, no longer raw, but no less real. He reached out and touched it with the backs of his fingers. Not to claim. To witness. I hated this, she whispered. But now. He leaned forward, forehead brushing hers. Now. She pressed her palm to his chest, over his steady heartbeat. Now I want you to see it. And not look away. I won't, he said, hoarse. And he didn't. When her lips met his, it was slow and full of questions. He answered every one with the way his hands came to her waist, not to pull but to steady. Her knees dug into the copper, slick and trembling, not from fear but from being held gently after too long in sharp hands. The kiss deepened like fog rolling in over Ashfen. Not hot, not yet, but full of the kind of warmth that grows in secret spaces. Steam curled around them, rising from the bath and from the blood beneath their skin. Rowan let herself lean forward, pressing into his chest, her damp hair leaving ghost prints on his skin. He kissed the corner of her mouth, then lower, over the place just under her jaw that once flinched at touch. It didn't flinch now. She guided his hand to her hip, then let go. A choice. Not a bond. Not pain. When he moved, it was with reverence. He helped her stand, wrapped her in a linen shawl warm from the radiator, and carried her, not to a bed, but to the moss-dried furs spread near the greenhouse heater. There, in the filtered moonlight and the sweet green hush of her own herbs, Rowan let herself be kissed open by the one man who'd never asked more of her than she could give. And she gave, not out of obligation, but hunger. Calder's mouth mapped her scars with a patience that made her ache. His tongue was a secret promise over her ribs. His hands didn't hesitate when she trembled, only steadied her like stone beneath tide. Their bodies met in silence, but it wasn't empty. It was full of every withheld moan, every breath caught in the throat for fear of cracking. Now, with no spells pulling them forward, every gasp was chosen. Every motion was sung between them like a new pact. When she cried out, it was not from pain, but from being seen. When he gripped her hand, it was not to bind, but to anchor. And when it was over, when their sweat cooled and her cheek rested on his chest as the lanterns guttered low, Rowan whispered the words that didn't feel like surrender anymore. I want to stay. His arms closed around her, and his voice was soft as moss. Then stay. Not because you must, but because you can. She kissed the hollow of his throat in answer. Later, As the greenhouse cooled and the world returned beyond the glass, Calder pulled a small box from beneath his coat and opened it on her thigh. Inside, a ring, wrought from moonbone and stormglass, fused by griefire and blacksmith prayer. No salt, no blood, only memory and will and promise. He didn't ask. He simply placed it in her palm and folded her fingers over it. "You choose when," he said. She leaned down and touched her forehead to his, lips barely brushing his skin. Soon, outside, just before dawn, a hawk's cry cut through the mist. Sable had returned, and the storm was not over. Chapter 25, The Final Parley. The bells of the Salt Cathedral tolled low and deliberate, their iron-throated voices resounding over Blackridge Square like the slow beat of a heart prepared for judgment. Crowds pressed shoulder to shoulder beneath the shadow of the cathedral's fractured spire, the salt-stung air charged with tension. Dockworkers, traders, witches cloaked in faded wool, and packmates from Ashfen all gathered under the fog-washed banners that draped from rusted iron balconies. 1,000 breaths held, 1,000 eyes turned toward the doors carved from bleached driftwood and inlaid with the spiral sigils of old. Inside, the nave was colder than it had any right to be. Sea chill had seeped into the stone long ago and never left. Rowan stood beside Calder beneath the broken salt crystal chandelier, its fractured light casting prismed halos across the moss-rubbed walls. The scent of consecrated salt and old wax clawed at her throat. The pews were filled with the uneasy elite, Coven emissaries with pearl-lined gloves, Harbor Guild captains stiff in storecoats, and pack elders wrapped in rain-dark furs. Tamsin sat just behind Rowan, hands folded tightly in her lap, her braid damp at the ends like she'd come through the tide itself. "Are you ready?" Calder murmured, his voice low, his shoulder brushing hers. He didn't reach for her. He didn't have to. Rowan let out a slow breath. "No," she whispered, "but we do it anyway." The floor of the nave was ringed in white salt, a ceremonial boundary that glimmered faintly under the lantern light. At the center of the circle stood the deep court emissary, a towering woman in navy robes, her hair slicked back like oilskin. Beside her, Isela Crow. The mother was draped in her salt-white finery as if the storm hadn't touched her at all. Her hands were folded serenely. Her face was calm, but her eyes were the color of a rip current, and Rowan could feel the tide behind them. "You stand accused," the emissary intoned, of violating the sacred terms of the Saltmark Accord, engaging in unsanctioned siphoning and twisting bonded magic beyond its ethical reach. "You may now offer your account." Isela didn't move. "I acted in accordance with what was necessary. We do not all have the luxury of sentimentality." A rustle moved through the chamber like a breeze through dry reeds. Calder stepped forward, his voice steady, amplified by the anchoring pull of the pack behind him. Sentiment did not tear this continent's ley-line stability. The Saltmark did. And the false firelight. And the siphons that fed on fear. Tamsin rose to her feet. The hush was absolute. She stepped into the circle, voice soft but clear. "I was one of the marked. Branded. I carried the flame not as a right but as a tether. And it drained me. It warped everything I felt. Every bond, every breath, filtered through the mother's hand." Rowan's hands curled at her sides, not in anger, but resolve. When she stepped into the circle, her boots left no trail in the salt. "I have walked through the salt wells. I have seen the siphon ghosts. I have felt the ache of a bond warped from within. And I have chosen, freely, fiercely, not to let that lie be my truth anymore." She turned to Calder. Her breath caught, but she didn't falter. "This isn't about whether we can love because we are tied. It's about whether we choose to." She held out her hand. Calder stepped forward, drawing from his coat the ring he'd remade, moonbone smoothed with wind glass, a whisper of light held in its curve. No vow came with it. No spellwork. He placed it in her palm and stepped back. Rowan looked down at it, at the weightless thing that held no demand, only hope. She closed her fingers around it and raised her chin. "I choose." A murmur swept through the cathedral, some startled, some quiet with awe. It didn't matter. Because Asila moved. She didn't speak. She didn't protest. She simply knelt, touched her fingers to the salt at her feet, and sliced a sigil into the floor. The deep court emissary flinched. "What are you doing?" The answer came not in words, but in water. A low tremor shivered through the stone. A crack hissed down the center of the nave, salt spilling like blood. The sigil burned blue, then red, then deep, reef dark black. The razor tide. Not a myth. Not a threat. An invocation. Calder was already moving. Rowan grabbed Tamsin by the wrist, dragging her back from the circle as the floor buckled. The deep court emissary shouted something in a language of anchors and floodgates. Beneath their feet, the world groaned. A roar like surf in a collapsing cave rose from the undercroft, and the cathedral's floor split wide, vomiting brine and shadow and salt-choked wind. The weeping salt well was no longer weeping. It was screaming. Asila stood alone in the circle, robes soaked, arms raised. "You wanted truth?" she called. "Then see it. The tide does not yield. And the mark is not broken." She vanished in the spray. And Rowan, fingers still clenched around the ring she had not yet placed on her hand, turned toward the shattering world and said, very quietly, "Then we'll break it ourselves." Chapter 26, Trial of the Salt. The cathedral shook. It began as a distant pulse beneath Rowan's boots, one beat, then another, like the ancient heart of the deep had stirred at last. She didn't need to glance back to know Calder had felt it too. His posture shifted behind her, the fine tremor running up through the ribs of the building mirroring the tension coiled along his spine. Below them, the weeping salt well was waking. Salt spray hissed through the shattered floor of the nave, slicking the stone and blooming into mist. Somewhere down there, Asila's sigil still glowed, dripping ancient power into the undercroft like a wound that refused to clot. Whatever restraint the cathedral's wards once held had snapped. And now, the sea was coming for them. Bran and Sable stood at the breach, flanking the splintered stairs. Their weapons were drawn, not for enemies, but for the flood. Behind them, the last of the civilians, Coven witches, harbor aides, a few dazed packmates, were being herded through the side passages that led out to the northern rail lines. "Go," Bran ordered, voice taut. "We hold the threshold." Calder shook his head once. "No one goes alone. Hold the line. I'll follow her." She didn't wait to argue. Rowan descended into the salt dark below, boots slapping wet against limestone, one hand pressed to the slick wall for balance. The air thickened as she dropped, first to mist, then to vapor, then to something stranger, electric, humming. By the time she reached the undercroft, her breath came shallow. Salt candles guttered in alcoves, drowned nearly to their wicks. The stone corridor had partially collapsed, bitter brine pooling at her knees, streaked with the eerie shimmer of the sea's claim. In the center of the vault, the razor-tide sigil glowed, pulsing with each breath of the flood. She stepped into it. The pain came like a lover's slap, sharp, intimate, necessary. Her soul mark flared against her skin, not with Asila's control, but with memory. Her own blood answering the call. She dropped to her knees and unslung the bundle at her back. Wrapped in oilcloth and bound in witch cord, the antithetic stylus, etched in ironwood and ash glass. One breath. Two. She began to write. The reversal was not elegant. It could never be. Where Asila's runes flowed like tidewater, Rowan's were jagged strokes, symbols of resistance rather than dominance. Her hand shook as she carved each one into the slick stone, green magic singing wild in her veins, offering no promise of survival. The undercroft howled. From above came a shout, Calder's voice, sharp with panic. Then his scent. Salt, pine, and blood. She didn't turn. "Don't," she said hoarsely. "I'm almost through." "You're bleeding." "Of course I am." She dug the stylus deeper. "This place doesn't want to be undone." Neither did I. And yet, she hit the final sigil. The circle flared. The recoil sent her flying, back into the water, limbs tangling, lungs seizing with brine. For a heartbeat, there was only silence, broken light, the ache in her ribs as she sank. And then hands, strong, familiar, desperate, plunged into the water after her. Calder dragged her to the edge of the pool, salt water sheeting off his coat and arms. He didn't say a word as he lifted her free, cradling her like something already lost. She coughed, hacked, dragged air into her chest, and whispered, "You can't keep catching me." His forehead touched hers, his body shaking harder than hers was. "Then stop falling." She turned her face into his shoulder, pressed her nose to the damp heat of his throat. He smelled like the wild again, like earth and fury and the tether she didn't want to sever. "I need to finish it," she breathed. "There's a second core. Below." He pulled back, jaw tight. "Rowan, no. I saw the lock. It's old. Woven into the first moon bond, the same tide magic Asila twisted. If I can use life raft to pair with the moonbone key, then it takes both of us." His voice was rough, final. "Don't ask me to stay behind again." Rowan hesitated. And then, slowly, she reached for his hand. Salt burned between their palms. Her fingers slid into his, anchoring on the lines of his knuckles, the worn callus across the base of his thumb. She lifted his hand to her chest, to the place just beneath the salt-mark scar. "I'm asking you," she whispered, "to trust me one last time." His eyes were wild, rimmed with silver, but steady. His thumb grazed the curve of her collarbone. "Only if you promise not to die. I've broken worse promises." His laugh was broken. "That wasn't funny." She leaned in, pressed her lips to the sharp edge of his jaw. "A vow in blood and breath and heat." "No, but it's honest." Behind them, the mist began to part. The lock revealed itself from the heart of the salt well, etched in pearl-veined stone, its design older than the cathedral, older than the accord. Symbols curled outward like a tide in retreat, waiting for their match. One that required both moonbone and breath. Rowan rose to her feet. Calder followed. And together, they walked into the water. Chapter 27, Razor Tide. The fog rolled in like a living tide, thick, brined, and thrumming with unnatural rhythm. It swallowed the narrow-gauge tracks and the dark silhouettes of the wounded being loaded into the last steam carriage, smearing the harbor's lantern glow into oil paint streaks across the causeway. Salt moaned beneath the wind. Rowan Vale knelt in the dew-wet grass near the first signal post, fingers pressed to the earth. Her herbs had wilted in her satchel, but the last of the salt-resistant root weeds still pulsed with stubborn life. She laid each strand in a precise spiral across the cobbles, murmuring to the rhythm of her own breath. Not quite a spell, not quite a prayer. The mist hissed against her bare arms. Her salt-marked scar ached like a chisel to bone. Behind her, Sable Rook stood guard with bow drawn, scanning the edge where sea met stone. Her breath steamed in short, calculated bursts. 10 minutes, she called softly. "Train's not waiting." Rowan nodded without looking. Her knuckles were pale where they pressed to a wet iron spike, sunk deep into the trackbed. Cold iron. No wonder the mist lingered here. She whispered to the roots. "Hold it down." Then she stood. Further down the line, Calder Voss was already moving, flanked by Bran and 2 of the harbor militia, his shoulders squared beneath the pressure of half-transformation. The fog made his wolf shadow flicker, muscles stretching against the bones of his collar, as if something beneath his skin wanted out. Cold irons seeded every 30 feet, Bran muttered, tossing aside another severed spike. "Clever bastards. Meant to trap us in, slow the surge." "They'll trap themselves if they're not careful," Calder said, voice low, ragged around the edges. "Get it out. All of it." Rowan crossed to him. The grass she'd laid held barely. Mist curled around it, but didn't rise past her ankles. "Root barriers holding," she said. "For now." Calder met her eyes. Even through the fog, the silver in his irises burned with pressure. "You're trembling. So are you." His hand brushed hers, just once, enough to spark the low hum that always lived between them now. Not magic, not quite. Something older, weightier. An echo of choices still being made. Behind them, the train engine shrieked, thin and high. "Go," Sable ordered. "Get the young out." The first two carriages shuddered forward. Children pressed to the glass, eyes wide. Behind them, a cluster of wounded werewolves and branded witches leaned against one another, smoke gray and silent. Then the fog split. Not gently. A column of deep-sea wind knifed through the brine mist, splitting it like silk. Salt exploded from the breach as a shape emerged, cloaked, sea-stained, eyes lit from within by deep court sigils. A voice, impossibly resonant, called, "Return the witch, or we take the train." Bran swore under his breath. Calder's fists clenched. Rowan didn't flinch. "I'm done being taken," she said. The deep court emissary moved forward, boots silent on salt, slick stone. "She carries the mark," he said. "And the Saltwell debt. We claim her in accordance with the Tide Accords." "You're late," Rowan said, stepping past Calder, voice steady. "The Accords are broken. You should feel it. The pull's gone. There's no siphon now." His eyes flicked down to the moonbone ring at her throat, then to the fresh scar peeking from beneath her collar, horizontal, healed by choice rather than right. "You rewrote it." "I'm still rewriting," she said. The wind howled behind her. The train coughed black steam. She reached for Calder without looking. He was already there. Their hands met in the fog, anchoring. He spoke softly, not to the envoy, but to her. "I can take the lead. Just say the word." Rowan's lips curved. "This time, we both step in." They turned together, facing the court. Calder's voice, wrapped in command, rolled out across the tracks. "She's under Ashfen's protection. You want her, you go through me." "And me," said Sable, already flanking them, bow drawn. "And me," Bran added from the shadows, cold eyes unwavering. The fog surged, parting around the envoy like a drawn breath. He raised one gloved hand. And the sea answered. The tide crashed against the harbor gates with a roar that cracked windows all the way back to the Stormglass lighthouse. Water surged past the edge of the causeway, rising with impossible speed, swirling with streaks of black and blue magic that stank of the deep. Train wheels shrieked. The envoy whispered one word, "Razor." Calder turned, grabbed Rowan's waist, and pulled her into him as the fog exploded around them. It wasn't panic. Not exactly. It was urgency threaded with a terrible clarity, the kind that came when time grew sharp. Rowan felt the sea in her lungs, the salt in her mouth, the bite of his body around hers. He shielded her with the entire breadth of his chest, half wolf and full command. And she pulled him closer. Their mouths met with the suddenness of a storm. Steam hissed, train shriek fading to a hollow clatter. Mist swirled above and below as the kiss anchored them, desperate and slow-burning, teeth and lips and breath passed like a lifeline. Rowan's hands tangled in the edges of his coat. Calder's fingers pressed into her back, memorizing each line of muscle, each catch of breath. He pulled away just enough to whisper, hoarse and low against her temple, "Together. No matter how deep it goes." Her answer was softer still, a vow only he could hear. "We go into the lock. Together." She pressed her forehead to his jaw, eyes closing against the rising wind. The court emissary paused. Something shifted behind his mask. "You'd die for her," he said. "No," Calder replied. "We'll live for each other." The sea kept climbing. From the platform behind them, a conductor shouted, "If we don't leave now, we don't leave at all." Sable turned. "Move the train." Bran and the remaining guards cleared the line. Children cried. The engine moaned, fighting for traction. As the first wheels began to turn again, Rowan and Calder stepped into the fog, not back toward the train, but forward. Toward the cathedral. Toward the Saltwell. They didn't look back. Only forward, into the sound of the tide calling something ancient to account. Chapter 28, Unmake the Salt. The salt tunnels had not been built for air. They pulsed with damp, brine-slick heat, echoing heartbeats not her own, living veins in a dying cathedral. Rowan's boots skidded once on the curved stone, but Calder caught her wrist before she fell. His touch was brief, grounding. No words passed between them. They had long since moved beyond the need for language in moments like this. Behind them, the last of the torchlight thinned. Before them, the salt well's core waited. It breathed. Not like lungs, like the sea, like the rise and suck of tide beneath ground. Alive and wrong. The water didn't shimmer, it churned with lightless pressure, something ancient trapped in a liquid cage. Moonlight had no place here, but the moonbone key pulsed on Calder's finger like it had been summoned home. "Ready?" he asked low. "No," Rowan said. Then stepped forward anyway. The basin widened, revealing the salt glyphs carved into the floor, deep, blackened from lifetimes of use. Lines in the shape of loss. A ritual designed to bind and bleed. A siphoning pattern still faintly aglow with stolen ink. She dropped to her knees at the edge. From a pouch at her belt, Rowan took a small pinch of witherroot and a sliver of heartbloom. Green magic was never just incantation. It was memory, inheritance, consequence. Her hands shook as she ground them between her fingers, the scent of citrus and ash filling the air. She leaned in and breathed it deep. The exchange came swift. Pain snapped through her spine, not her own, not entirely. The echo of hundreds who had been bound, salt-marked, drained. It slammed into her nerves like seawater into a wound. Her lips parted in a sharp inhale, but she held. She'd asked the pain to come. Now she bore it. Calder stepped behind her. His palm hovered, then rested gently against her back, not to pull her out, but to anchor her in. "I'm here," he said. That was all. No command. No correction. Just presence. She needed that more than protection. "Start it," she said hoarsely. He did. The moonbone ring flared when it touched the central lock embedded in the glyphwork. A hiss, then a low, grinding tremor answered. It was the sound of centuries resisting change. The seal bucked. Salt cracked. Fissures raced outward like lightning veins, pulsing with silvery light. Calder gritted his teeth, shoulders tight with strain. But the ring held. The lock began to turn. A rustle behind them. Tamsin stepped into view, barefoot, her braid unraveling, fox-bright eyes rimmed in salt-crusted red. She looked like a girl trying to remember how to be whole. "I can take some of it," she whispered. "The rest of the Salmark. The pieces clinging to me." Rowan's first instinct was to refuse. Her second was to trust. Tamsin came forward slowly, never touching, and knelt on the other side of the basin. Her hand hovered above a glowing line. "You've always borne more than your share. Let me carry the part that was mine." Rowan nodded once. "You'll need to follow my pattern. Don't fight the rhythm." The three of them became a triad of focus, breath, surrender. Magic began to spiral. Green light met moonlight met old salt. The siphoning glyphwork groaned, began to reverse. Instead of pulling, it repelled. Instead of consuming, it yielded. It was an unnatural twist, a forced unmaking, and the world hated them for it. Pain came sharper this time. Rowan cried out. Not loud, but fractured. Her hands pressed hard to the floor, and her back arched with the rawness of it. Calder's hand dropped to hers. He didn't grip. He simply laced their fingers, offering his pulse as shield. The kiss didn't begin like a kiss. It began as air, shared, stolen, her forehead against his temple, their breathing synchronizing in ragged gasps. She turned toward him, and he toward her, and when their mouths met, the pain twisted into something molten. It surged through the lock. The glyphs flared. Their kiss was not about hunger, but defiance. It was the sound of every no ever uttered in chains becoming a yes between equals. Salt shattered. A ringing crack split the floor. The siphon web snapped in a final arc of brilliance, and the tide magic screamed as it died. Rowan collapsed forward, panting, every nerve flayed open. "I have you," Calder murmured, folding her against his chest. His own frame trembled, not from effort but from restraint. Moondet flickered along his skin like it wanted a vessel. "No," she said. "You gave enough." He looked down at her. "So did you." But the ritual wasn't done. The air didn't clear. It thickened. Beneath their feet, something massive shifted. The core lock had opened. But the tide had not yet ceased. Tamsin coughed behind them. It's still coming. Something's unfinished. Rowan tried to rise. Her limbs screamed. Her chest was scorched from within. Calder helped her stand, and she leaned into him with the weight of someone who had almost broken. What's left? He asked. Rowan turned her palm upward. The veins there glowed faintly green, too faint. She shook her head. It's not the pain. Then what? She looked up at him, and her voice was a cracked whisper. The last debt. His eyes darkened. Of course. The moon debt. The original fracture. The oldest finding. The one made in love and shattered in war. I'll carry it, he said without pause. Rowan touched his chest. No. We share it. One last time. Then she looked at the glyphs, now only cracked ash in the stone. Come with me. He did. They stepped into the center of the broken ritual, not as victim and protector, but as two who had burned, survived, and chosen. The core would not unmake itself. It needed a keystone. So they offered themselves together. Chapter 29, The Last Debt. The moon rose like a reckoning, pale and merciless above the broken arches of the salt cathedral. Its light soaked the weeping saltwell basin in bone-white silence, broken only by the distant hiss of shifting tides and the irregular thunder of the sea crashing too close, too soon. Calder Voss stood at the basin's edge, shoulders drawn tight beneath the open weight of the sky. The moonbone key had done its work. The siphoning web of the saltmark was broken. But the price of severance, of legacy, of curse, of pact, was not paid in ink and ritual alone. It came now, through his spine like molten iron, through his breath like shards of frost, through every nerve that remembered the chains his ancestors forged and his bloodline carried. The moon debt was coming home. He staggered, one boot scuffing backward across loose saltstone. Bran moved to brace him, but Calder lifted a hand, wordless, proud, refusing to fall with eyes upon him, even as his knees buckled. The tidal surge of bond debt was worse than a shift. It clawed deeper than claws ever could. His throat clenched with an animal snarl he could not suppress, his palms bracing on cracked stone. The world narrowed to blood and burn and breathless white. Let me, came Rowan's voice, low, but not soft. Steady. Binding. She stepped into the salt glow, no longer merely the green witch of Ashfen, but something carved from sacrifice. Her hair lifted in the sea wind. Her salt mark glowed pale silver at her throat. And between her hands, cupped like a hearth light, shimmered the green-gold weave of life magic. Not lush or radiant as before. This was thinner, refined. Earned. Rowan knelt in front of him. Not out of submission, but in an offering. He bared his teeth. No, I won't have you. You already did, she whispered. Back at the saltwell. You gave me the moonbone. You trusted me to touch the lock. Let me take the weight now. Share it. Choose to. The words twisted in him more viciously than any magic. Because she said it like love. Not obligation. Not doom. A vow given by hand, not bound by blood. He didn't nod. Didn't have to. Her palm lifted to his sternum. Rowan sang. Not a full melody, not the echoing cradle song she'd used on the causeway, but something raw. Breathless. The vowel of his name drawn out in salt-laced syllables. Her hand pulsed against his chest, and he felt it, life twisting, splitting, reaching. The accord was not forged in law, but in pain made halved. He clutched her forearm as if she were the only tether holding him from the abyss. Maybe she was. His spine arched with a sound no man should make. But through it, he felt the burn lessen. The surge of moon debt pulling from his chest into hers, seared by her green light, tempered by her breathing. Her face crumpled in ache, but she did not pull back. Her mouth moved, incantation or apology, he couldn't tell. She was crying. And still she sang. The debt cracked like bone through salt. Then stilled. They collapsed together onto the stone. Her weight against his chest, light as a blown petal. He cradled her there, his breath staggered. Her face pressed against the side of his throat, salt-wet and trembling. He kissed the crown of her head. You should have let me carry it. No, she said, barely audible. We both lived it. We both end it. Above them, from the cliff edge, a line of torchlight wavered, the pack. The Harbor Guild. Those who had marched to the seawall and held, shoulder to shoulder, against the rising tide. They'd made a wall of flesh and will. Human and wolf. Witch and smith. No bond held them together, only choice. Bran stood on the rise, arms crossed, the wind tugging his coat. Beside him, Sable lowered her crossbow, face unreadable. The tide was withdrawing. For the first time in living memory, it wasn't claiming. But the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the hush before a verdict. From the spires above, the bells of the Salt Cathedral rang once, sharp and final. The final judgment would be made by dawn. Chapter 30, The Accord. The Salt Cathedral had never been so quiet. Its pillars, crusted with centuries of salt rain and shadowed by the scars of the razor tide, stood sentinel over the sea of gathered breath. Harbor Guild banners hung limp in the still air. Ashfen wolves, half-shifted and stripped of ceremonial rank, flanked the open nave. And high above, where once the false fire of the Coven had flickered with illusion, only the first honest light of dawn burned. The world was changing, and it demanded witness. Rowan Vale stood at the heart of it, barefoot on consecrated stone, the salt mark on her throat faded to a pale echo, her green robes shot through with ash and gold thread. She did not flinch when the magistrate unrolled the scroll. By consensus of the Harbor Guild, the pack elders, and the city magisterium, the woman intoned, the ritual system known as the salt mark is hereby abolished. Its use in binding contracts or sacrificial siphons is declared unlawful. The House of Salt shall surrender all remaining artifacts, grimoires, and blood ledgers to public record. Complicity will be tried. No one wept. No one cheered. Some things end not with fury, but with the weight of what should never have begun. On the platform across from Rowan, Mother Asela Crow stood motionless between two guards, her salt-white robes dulled, her silver braid undone. Still regal. Still untouched by the shackles she wore. Mother Crow, the magistrate said, voice neither cruel nor kind, you are hereby stripped of all rights, ranks, and recognized affiliations. You are sentenced to exile beyond treaty borders. You will speak no magic, touch no altar, and carry no title. Asela lifted her chin. You cannot exile what built the spine of this city. No, Rowan said softly, but we can name it. And we can choose to walk a different road. Their eyes met one final time. Asela looked away first. The judgment passed like a slow tide. When it ebbed, Calder stepped forward. He wore no Alpha's pelt. Only a salt-stitched shirt and his moo-bone ring, polished to a muted sheen. At his hip, the new accord document had been sealed in Ashfen wax, leaf green, cut with silver and ash. I stand as witness, Calder said, voice rasped from salt and sleepless nights. And as bondmate, not bound. This accord is not forged in blood or fate. It is chosen. He held the small box in his hand as if it weighed more than war. Rowan did not speak. She only extended her hand, open, steady. Inside the box, the ring shimmered, woven of storm glass and moo bone, braided with a single thread of green gold vine. No seal. No lock. Only craft and choice. Calder placed it in her palm. Not on her finger. Rowan looked down at it for a breath that felt like a lifetime. Then she lifted it with her free hand and slid it onto her own finger, slow and deliberate. A murmur rippled through the hall. No vow was spoken. But the truth of it thrummed between them, quiet and immense. He took her other hand, pressed it to his chest. She leaned in, touched her brow to his. The kiss that followed was not urgent. Not a fevered thing. It was a closing circle. A completed spell. Not destiny fulfilled. But love chosen, with eyes wide open. Applause did not follow. But a sound rose, first soft, then echoing. A howl, low and harmonic, from Ashfen wolves at the edges. Then another from the city folk, an old sailor's chant repurposed, their voices joining the wild. A different harmony. A shared one. By dusk, the accord had been ratified. Blackridge and Ashfen would keep mirrored stations, messengers, healers, and treaty watchers traveling back and forth. A new page. Rowan was named the first emissary of the Green Accord. Not witch. Not wife. Something more. That night, under the Moonwatch Tower, Rowan and Calder stood once more before the gathered pack. No torches. Only the wind through pine and the glass house glow behind them, where soft green light spilled from vines now free to grow. Calder took her hand again, his thumb brushing the ring. "You still choose this," he murmured. Rowan turned her face to his. "I never stopped." Their kiss this time tasted of pine and possibility. Of something begun, not ended. Of a future unbranded. Across the garden, in the first bed of rich soil and cracked glass, Tamsin knelt and pressed a tiny, furrowed seed into earth that had once borne only salt. A new beginning. A whistle rose from the mist-wrapped harbor below, slow and steady, drawn out into fog like a lullaby. Steam curled skyward. The winds of Ashfen answered, soft and evergreen. And the story closed, not with a door, but with a gate swinging wide.